Open meetings of the Texas Government Code as amended. I call to order a meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Austin Peninsula School District for Monday, January 9, 2012 at 6:47 p.m. The board may meet in closed session to deliberate the appointment, employment, evaluation, reassignment, duties, discipline, or dismissal of a public officer or employee, deliberation of purchase, exchange, or lease or value of real property, deliberation of negotiated contract for prospective gift to the district, deliberation about commercial or other financial information the board has received in business prospect, or deliberation of offer of financial or other incentive to a business prospect, and or to consult with legal counsel regarding pending or contemplated litigation, or on a sub offer, or in a matter which the school's legal counsel determines should be confidential in accordance with Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code, Sections 551.074, 551.072, 551.073, 551.087, and 551.071, respectively. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back from the holidays. Thanks for being here. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Moya. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Okay. All right. All in favor of that motion, please raise your right hand. Pass Nancy for the board members on the dais. Let's now move to the pledge. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Ms. Moya. I've been informed Mr. Schneider is ill this evening, and Ms. Bradley will be late if she's able to make it at all. She had another commitment this evening. We've got several agenda items that we're going to try to get through. I also want to apologize for anyone. This may be one of the nights that our television viewing audience could be incredibly low with the BCS National Championship competing against us. But we'll.
No, really, it's our meeting. They want to watch this.
Then those are some crazy people. So let's get started and try to get through this as quickly as possible and let our guests who might be interested in going and watching get out of here as fast as possible as well. Dr. Starfin.
Yes, Mr. President and trustees, before we begin tonight on the substantive topics that we have for this evening, I just wanted to take time to acknowledge the students and teachers that have created the banners and signs placed around the auditorium in celebration of School Board Appreciation Month. The official recognition of the Board of Trustees will actually take place at our January 30th meeting, but tonight we just wanted to be sure that you knew that a lot of people are thinking about you and appreciate the work that you're doing for the district each and every day. The plants behind me, you may or may not be able to see them. They're these lovely, incredibly green and lush ferns, come from our very own Clifton Center greenhouse. I just wanted you to be sure when you take those home, if you get a chance, if you haven't visited any time soon or recently, that there are a lot of great things going on at Clifton, and just on behalf of the district, thank you, and we appreciate what you're doing. So enjoy your celebration all month. And so we'll jump right into, which almost puts us back on time, but I'm sure Karen Sperry, our Chief of Staff, can help us do that. She is going to spend just a few minutes getting you ready for a process that we do every once in a while in the district. It's the refresher on the process, timeline, and criteria for naming a school, and we're doing this now because you'll be naming pretty soon the Linder Pre-K Center. Over the next several weeks, the board, as outlined in your policy, will select a name for the center, and tonight, Chief of Staff Karen Sperry will provide the brief overview of the school naming process that will be useful in your preparation for your discussions later this month. This item is scheduled for about 15 minutes, but this is just to give you the highlights and point you in the right direction if you have any questions. Thank you, and Happy New Year, Ms.
Thank you, Dr. Starfin. Thank you for the gifts. And Ms. Sperry.
Thank you, President Williams, Dr. Starfin, and board members. As you know, a new early childhood center demonstration school is being constructed in Southeast Austin as part of the 2008 Apple at Work bond program. The center is scheduled to open this coming August 2012, and this evening, as Dr. Starfin mentioned, the board is scheduled to discuss the process, timeline, and criteria for naming the new center. First, for the benefit of the board and the public, I'll provide a high-level description of the facility. The Early Childhood Center was designed based upon the educational specifications that we use for our elementary schools here in Austin, except it was built with specific modifications for early childhood education program delivery. So this means we just want to make sure that everything in the school, throughout the school, is at the right height, the right depth, that those sinks are at the right height, and that the furniture is the right size, so that our little 4- and 5-year-olds who start their public education in this school can have a great experience. The center will not only relieve Linder Elementary School as a separate facility to serve Linder's pre-K and kinder classes, the facility will also be used on a district-wide basis as a demonstration and training site for pre-K teachers. The facility is 72,000 square feet. It includes 24 classrooms. There would be 8 classrooms in 3 pods, each with their own commons area. And of course, the school will also have an administrative suite, a library, media center, music and art classrooms, multi-purpose spaces, and the general connection of assembly space by combining a gym, cafeteria, stage area. I've affirmed with construction management that the facility is on schedule and the principal selection process is underway, and so it is an appropriate time to name the facility so that other planning can be underway. Included in your notebook this evening is your board policy for naming facilities. That's Policy CW Local, which addresses the criteria for naming new facilities as well as the process. In accordance with this process, the community was broadly noticed about the opportunity to submit nominations. This process was kicked off on October the 5th with a press release, website launch, online nomination form, English and Spanish scripts to our principals, asking them to share the information with their school communities, coverage on Channel 22, and broad dissemination through the district stakeholder list. According to the schedule outlined in your agenda item, the administration is prepared to provide in your board delivery this Thursday, January the 12th, an overview matrix of all the schools in AISD so that you can see how schools have been named in the past as context for you. And then a summary list of the nominations received this fall and descriptions of the nominees. Based upon input from the calendar committee, at its recent meeting, the board is scheduled to discuss the naming at its next dialogue meeting on January 23rd and to take action on the January 30th regular board meeting. And I'd like to thank Pat Dabbert from the Office of Public Relations and Multicultural Outreach for assisting in the leadership of this process for the first time this year.
Mr. President, that concludes our presentation, and we can answer a few questions if you have anything you'd like to know about your policy or where we are in the process.
Okay, thanks, Karen. Thanks, Pat, wherever she is. Pat, thank you very much. Let's open up for comments or questions about our policy or the process or the timing.
Kind of all hands at this.
Okay, I think we're in good shape. So we'll look forward to the dialogue meeting on the 23rd and the information received this Thursday, and then the board will need to have enough time that we can make sure we can try to get to a point that we're ready to take action on the 30th.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. We gave us extra time, Dennis, so that way we can feel like we're ahead of the schedule, so you guys can feel good right now. We're 5 minutes up. So we will now move into our annual demographic update. We've got 45 minutes allotted for this item. Welcome to our guest, Dr. Christopherson.
Mr. President, trustees, as you know, each year the district commissions a demographic report that provides an analysis of district and student population projections, trends, student mobility, and other projections. This evening, Dr. Dennis Harner, the primary author of the demographic report, will present a summary of projected population changes throughout the district over the next 10 years. AISD staff will then describe the impact of these changes on the capacity of all elementary and secondary schools. Also here this evening to participate in tonight's discussion is Ryan Robinson, the City of Austin demographer, and Eldon Rude, the manager of Austin operations for Metro Studies. So thank you and welcome as well. And then we have, of course, our CEO, Lawrence Fryer, and his staff that are available to answer questions as well. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Harner so he can jump right into it. Welcome and Happy New Year.
President Williams, board members, Dr. Karstafen. My name is Dennis Harner. We're here for our annual update. Seems like it always occurs about this time, football time, January.
Sorry.
That's okay, it's fine. We've been doing this for a long time with the district. I can't remember, I think my first engagement with the district was back in the late 80s, and we've been doing this almost continuously since the mid-90s. So we've been kind of a fixture around here. I've seen a lot of people come and go, but it's been a good ride for me. We've kind of cut up our presentation into 7 major elements tonight to kind of streamline things. The first item, I get the right page here. There we go. The first 3 items are actually kind of new information to you. They're things that we haven't focused upon in the past, but given that we just completed a census, this is a good time to provide you with some census data, some overview from a census perspective. And then we have some information in here from the American Community Survey, which you're going to hear more about in the future. It's going to be a major source of data for school planning. And then we have another section in here for examining student mobility trends. Mobility, I think, is a very important consideration in delivery of a great program in this modern age. The last 4 items are things that you've seen before: geographical information system, district enrollment projections, housing trends, and then small area projections. So we'll deal with them all, but like I said, those are not new to you, so you'll recognize some of the information in there. Now, major census trends. We, of course, are looking back at the period from the year 2000 to the year 2010, and overall the district grew by about 64,000 people, not kids. This is total population. I apologize. I sometimes use kids and population intermittently together. We went from 572,000 up to 636,000, an increase of about 11,000. Now, in terms of housing units, we grew by about 45,000 from 242 to 287,000 housing units. Now, do a little math there. If you divide the number of people by the number of housing units, you only get about 1.4 persons per housing unit. That's really a very low number, and that can be explained in large part by our large student population here, a lot of apartments, a lot of young people coming into town. So that's one of the reasons we have relatively low enrollment increases, because we don't have as many kids coming in as we might think we're going to have. With regard to the racial and ethnic distribution, by far and away the Hispanic population led the trail with 49,000 increase, followed by the white population, about 16,000. The African American population of this school district declined by about 9,000 people in that 10-year period. And then the Asian population increased by about 6,400. Now, in terms of where these changes occurred, this map number 1 on slide, it's my slide 4. If it's a dark green area, it had an increase in population. If it's a dark purple area, it had a decline in population. So the dark green areas, and by the way, these are mapped at the attendance zone level for elementary schools so that you could kind of get a feel for the neighborhoods that we're talking about here. So the dark green areas on the south side of the district are pretty recognizable, and you know where all those areas are. But then look in the center of the district. The CBD, Central Business District, grew. The area just north of the CBD is the university area. It grew considerably. Those are the 2 major areas of growth north of the river. There are some outliers, but those are the 2 biggies. Now, the purple areas, you can see that one purple area kind of in the east central part of the district. That is the Metz and Sanchez attendance zones. They declined considerably because of the demolition of apartments. So we had a considerable loss of population. But now, don't think that it's going to stay away forever, because they're going to start building replacement units over there fairly soon. So that's kind of there was a decline, and now then eventually there will be an increase to follow that. Now, interestingly, the other purple areas are kind of light purple. There's a band of attendance zones across the north side of the district, and that's housing that was built back in the 60s and 70s. It has become mature. The neighborhoods are built out. The families have grown older. And so we have an aging of the population, got a empty nest phenomenon. So we've had a decline in enrollment in that band of elementary zones across that north central part of the district. Similarly, in the south central part of the district, kind of along Ben White Boulevard, you see that a lot of those attendance zones have declined in population. And that's the same phenomenon. Housing built in the 60s and 70s, built out now, and we're getting declines.
So Dennis, just make sure just for terminology, people watching, the difference between a population change, housing change, and the use of the word enrollment.
We don't want to use the word enrollment.
Yeah, because I think
This
I may have heard you say enrollment, but I'm not sure that it's always
I
correlates
apologize.
to
This is
enrollment.
people, population, we'll get to enrollment.
Right. I just want to be sure, because I think I may have heard you say the word enrollment, so I want people, there's change, right now we're at the macro level, and then we'll get to what this means at an enrollment level later.
I apologize if I did that. I tried to catch myself, but sometimes you just slip. Moving on to the housing change, it's a very similar picture. You can see the dark purple areas over there in the Metz and Sanchez. You can see the growth downtown. You can see the growth on the south and western periphery, but really not a whole lot of growing areas on the north side in terms of housing, And in fact, if you look closely, you can see that a few of those zones up there in the north central had housing decline. And once again, that's probably due to the demolition of apartment units. Okay. American Community Survey, ACS as we call it, is an annual survey that is compiled at several different levels. And the school district is large enough that over the next few years, you'll be getting annual data. You're over 65,000 people, so we'll be getting data for the school district. And that's good data because that deals with things like income, occupation, employment, poverty, education, all sorts of variables that there's no other place to get that information than through the ACS. And we've actually had one elementary school call for data from the ACS as they're applying for a grant. So this is good information for those who are doing the grant application process. The data that we have in this report, and there are some maps further on in the back of the report that show you some of the variables that I picked out to show you, but it's from data that was just released in December, and it is for the time period 2006 to 2010. It's a very extensive survey, and it's the data that we've mapped is for census tracts. So those are the census tracts from the 2010 census, not from the 2000 census. So I've got the maps. The maps, I think, are provided at the end of this report, but I'm only going to show one and kind of give you a feel for the type of stuff you can get from the ACS. And this is map 10 on page 7. And what I'm looking at here is the distribution of private school kids, kids enrolled in private schools based upon this census survey. And you can see the dark green areas are those that have the large number of private school kids. And the darkest green of those have over 30% of the kids in private schools. So that's the situation, particularly on the west side of Austin and down in the southwest part of Austin. You do have a considerable number of kids going to private schools. I don't want to say enrollment, kids going to private schools. Once again, this is based upon the census data that we have. Table 2 is, I think, included at the end of this report, and it provides considerable amount of data, and it's pretty hard to read, though, so I won't show it to you. It's very, very small print. Now, the next section that we are talking about has to do with student mobility. And what I have to do here is define mobility for you. And I have 3 measures of mobility. I have kids who are here last year and who are not here this year. Those kids have departed the district. They've gone somewhere else. They've either gone to out of state or doesn't really matter where, but they're just not here anymore. Then we have kids who moved in between last year and this year. Those are newcomers, and they can come from a lot of different places. They can come from an adjacent district. They can come from anywhere around the world. And then the third measure of mobility that we look at is kids who have moved from one house to another from one year to the next. So that's what I call internal mobility. So in terms of the new students, we had 16,000 new students between last year and this year. And half of them were in grades 1 through 12, and the other half were in those lower grades, early childhood, pre-K, and kindergarten. So we do separate them out so that we can get, the distinction there. Now, if we had 16,000 who were new, we had 68,000 who were not new. In other words, they were here both years. 58,000 were at the same address. 10,000 were at a different address. So they moved somewhere within the district. We don't know where. Well, we do know where, but we do it by address. So we have the 10,000 that moved. We don't know why or anything else. We just know we have this big mobility factor within the district. Now, another point is that we don't know who moved within the school year. This is snapshot to snapshot, so it's October to October. So we really don't have a measure of what's going on from October to December or January. We do know there's mobility in there, but we have to kind of take it from year to year. Then we had 10,000 kids in grades K through 12 leave the district. What we've done there is excluded high school kids, high school seniors. We took them out of the picture. And there are maps at the end of this report to kind of, there are several more maps, but I just want to deal with one, and that is map 14 on page 9, which is students new to the district. And your eyes should pretty quickly focus in on the really dark green areas. And as usual, the North Lamar area up there in the linear attendance zone has jam-packed full of students new to the district. And then if you go down I-35, you can see a number of other planning areas that are dark green. So these are the areas where you have a lot of, once again, mobile students. Okay. Now, this chart here is the table 4 on page 10. And what I've tried to do here is to identify the amount of mobility at any one school attendance zone. So at the very top, on the top left, you see the elementary name and the percent of the total student mobility that school represents. So Cook had the highest number, 2.8%. Patton was second, 2.5. And by the way, most of these really high zones with high mobility have lots of apartments. Okay, you can think about these zones and think about Patton. And somebody said, well, how could Patton have all these kids? Well, Patton has an awful lot of apartments. That's the elementary side. Down on the lower left, it's the middle school, and the Burnett Middle School had 10% of the total mobility, 10%. So Burnett is just in and out all day long, kids coming and going.
So Dennis, you want to clarify?
That's one of my measures of mobility.
Yeah, can you clarify what new means in this context when you have
That's
16?
the new to the district.
So if we look, this is where the 16,000 kids show up?
And Burnett gets 10%, the Burnett attendance zone gets 10% of that total, yes, sir.
So I'm trying to look at the elementary school. So it picks up the elementary school, pre-K and K, but you're saying that Cook would only have 2.8% new kids in a school year.
No,
So is this?
it would have 2.8% of the mobile kids, of the kids who are new to the district.
New to the district.
The title says percent of students new to AISD for that period. So that's where Cook gets 2.6% of the new students.
I guess I'm trying to make sure we're clear, because if the incoming kindergarten or pre-K class is probably more than 2.8%, and those kids are new to the district.
They're excluded
So this is kids,
from K to 12.
so you've skipped these kids. How did you know to exclude them? Because they had siblings already in our schools?
No, just by the address. If they weren't here last year and they're here this year, they're new to the district.
That'd be a pre-K kid. So all those
That
pre-K
could be.
kids.
That's why we only do K to 12.
That's why we took them out.
We take them out. We take the little kids out because they don't represent a full grade.
So
It's just a way to standardize the approach, because every year we do it the same, so that's how we standardize.
Well, let me go to one school that doesn't have pre-Ks. So if you go to some a low mobility school like Brightwoods has 0.6 new, but they're going to have an entirely new kindergarten class every year that's 1/6 of the grades.
But it's excluded,
Because then you start with first grade for them?
yes. That's correct.
So what you're doing is, maybe everybody else understood that. So you're excluding the lowest grade level
That's
in
right.
each school, and then looking at the new kids that are in the grade, whatever the year 2 at that offered at that school through the rest of the class.
You're right on track. You've got it exactly.
And may I ask a question? Why did you use the word mobility? How are you defining mobility? Because
Well,
we have a very, we have a
Mobility, to me, means they're at a different address. That's how I measure.
different home address.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so that's different from mobility in AISD as we define it.
Well, and it probably is.
Well,
That's why I
definitely.
tried to
Yeah.
define it as best I could.
Okay,
So we've got the class that are new to the district, those who have departed the district, and those who have moved within the district. So the main thing they all three have in common is they have a different, well, the non-movers don't have a new address, but the other two classes have a new address.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I know you got more stuff. This is still confusing. It just seems like the numbers are way low percentage-wise, but that's,
It's not, it's the percent of the total. So if there's 10,000, if there are 10,000 mobile kids, the Cook, go back up there.
it's percentage of the district total, not
Yes,
percentage of the.
Yes, it's the percent of the district.
Not that campus.
It's the kids at that
Okay, never mind.
campus, in that attendance zone, that's their percent of the total mobile kids, the new kids as it is. on 2
So all these
to 4.
percentages would add up to 100%?
That's correct.
And the number you're using, the baseline number, is it 16,000 or is it something else?
It's that 16, yes, that's 16,000, correct.
So that's the percentage of the 16,000 that they would have. So if you took Cook, you'd have 2.8% times 16,000, and that would tell you how many new kids they have.
I've got to make sure it's the 16,000 and not the 10,000.
But that's what I'm trying to figure out because if you took out all of the first,
Yeah, it's the 16,000. Well, no, it's out of the 7,500. The 8,500 we took out. You see there at the very top category? There's 7,500 in grades 1 through 12, and then 8,500 in the lower grades.
okay, so this is the allocation of the 7,500 kids by
That's correct.
percentage.
That's right.
So that would say that Burnett would have 10% of 7,500?
The Burnett attendance zone, not the Burnett school, the Burnett attendance zone. We're focusing here on attendance zones, not on individual campuses.
So I'm just trying, so that would be 10% of 7,500, be 750 new kids to AISD that live in the Burnett attendance zone?
Yes, that's correct.
In the last 5 years?
Yes, well, it's an average. We take 5 years' worth of data, but we average it over the 5 years.
Okay. Is it per year, or is it a cumulative for 5 years?
It's averaged for the 5 years.
So I would say.
The 7,500 is an average of the 5 years.
Okay, so that would say that in 1 year, on average, Burnett would have had 10% of the 7,500 or 750 new kids last year, new to the district, that moved into the Burnett attendance zone.
Yeah, that's what it would be.
But since we're doing it by elementary and,
Well, we try to show you all 3 levels, so if you're interested, for instance, in middle schools and high schools, but not elementary, you could focus on that.
so each of these levels is 100% unto itself.
That's correct.
So 750% of the kids at Burnett, and then you spread those to the elementary schools that all feed into Burnett, and that 750 kids are allocated to those elementary schools. They may or may not choose to attend those elementary schools, but this is where they live.
Yes, that'll work. It's not an actual, the crosswalk doesn't work that well because the schools that feed Burnett, their attendance zones are different than the Burnett attendance zones. They don't fit together
It's not
perfectly in a
perfect,
puzzle.
but roughly. Okay, Ms. Torres?
I'm sorry, Dr. Harney, you said that it's the Burnett attendance zone, but not necessarily Burnett Middle School.
That's correct.
So does that also mean not necessarily even AISD?
No, if they're new, they're in the Burnett attendance zone.
Okay, so they are within AISD attending
yes.
one of our schools somewhere?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see, then, we're finishing up on mobility, and we're moving on then to the GIS update. GIS stands for Geographical Information System, and geocode is a word that means we address match, or means we locate each kid on the map with a little pin, if you will, kind of pinpoint mapping, and we can then go in and overlay our geographical units, the planning areas and the attendance zones over the kids, and we can compile kids by whatever characteristic you want to do, race and ethnicity, English language learner, free and reduced lunch, et cetera, and so on. And we can derive statistics from which you can draw maps. And these maps that I reference here, 17 through 25, I believe they're at the end of your handout if you are so inclined to look at them. But they're similar to maps you've seen before. And really the trends, they stay pretty consistent from one year to the next, you know, the various socioeconomic characteristics. In the next section, district enrollment projections. We need district enrollment projections to serve as our control total because what we require that the sum of our planning area projections, remember we've got this 569 planning areas, the sum of all those planning areas must equal or approximately equal the district level projections. So how did we do last year? Well, in the 2010-11 report, we projected that the enrollment this year would be 86,524, and it turns out it's 86,738. So we missed it by 212 kids. That's pretty close. Anyway, at least I'm happy with it. Moving on then to looking at these projections over time. This chart here on page 13 shows the mid-range projections, or the low, mid, and the high projections for the next 10 years. We only like to talk about the next 5 years. I do a 10-year projection because for some things you need to have 10 years, so I provide it to you, but we like you to stop at 5 years. And we see the district in the mid-range projection going to about 6,400, going up by about 6,400 kids next year, or in the end of the 5-year period. So if you divide that out, that's over, well over 1,000 a year. That's over 1,200 a year. That's up from where we've been in the past few years. And what I think we're talking about here is that bubble of little kids moving on up the system. I mean, we're approaching 8,000 kindergartners. When I started working for the district, we were at 6,000 kindergartners. So that's what's happened, is that this huge number of young people have entered the system and are moving on up in the grades. And so even if the births, we'll talk about that in a minute, slowed down, we would still get increased growth for the next 5 years, according to my mid-range projections. Now, when we break down the mid-range projection into its 3 school-type components, the top line there is the elementary for 10 years, the middle line is the high school for 10 years, and the bottom line is the middle school for 10 years. Once again, I like you to stop after 5 because we start losing confidence when we get much past that. But the bottom line is that the elementary schools, the enrollment should increase by about 2,500 kids. So if we divide that by 800 kids, that's about 3 new schools in the next 5 years at 800 a school. Middle school up by about almost 1,900. That's much more than 1 new middle school. And then the high school is up by 2,000, a little over 2,000. And we feel pretty confident about these projections, so there's clearly going to be a need for some new facilities in the not-so-distant future. Okay. The one last slide with regard to projections is comparing the births and the kindergarten enrollment, because, like I said, this is what really drives it all. The top line is the number of births for our zip codes since 1994. And you can see that it peaked at about 12,744, okay, in 2007. We don't yet have 2011. It'll be available hopefully next week. So that's the top line. That's the births. The bottom line is the kindergarten 5 years later. So that 12,539 kids born in the year 2006 translated into 7,819 kindergarten kids 5 years later. Okay? So that's kind of a relationship. I think you can see that it's a fairly linear, and the correlation is, I didn't calculate it, but it's pretty close. So the one thing that you can see there, though, is that the births declined in 2010, and I expect that in 2011, they probably declined again, maybe a little. It's going to be close. But so this is our leading indicator for our kindergarten enrollment projection. Where are the births? The dark green areas show the zip codes that had increases, large increases between the year 2000 and the year 2010. The light pink show small decreases, and the dark pink show large decreases. And I think you can see the concentration of light and dark pink in the center of the district, particularly north of the river, although the 2 big south side zip codes, 78704 and 45, had declines in that period also. Okay, we now move on to the last section, which is the small area projections. And what we do here is we have these planning areas that we have a cohort survival model for the next 5 years to project enrollment increases. And we also include in that calculation the development of new housing by subdivisions. Now, previously, if you look at this table 12 on page 17, the left column tells you what quarter we're talking about. So Q1 of 2008 had annual starts of 1,502. And if you go on down those 2 columns, by Q3 of 2011, we were down to 661 annual starts. So we've had a pretty major hit on the housing market. And by the way, these are single-family detached housing units. This does not include townhouses or apartments. They're a separate category of housing, but a big portion of the growth projection incorporates this single-family component. So that's kind of the truth on that matter. I think we're close to a bottom, and hopefully one of the gentlemen to my right will deal in more detail with where he thinks we are. But We've obviously, for the last 3 quarters, been in the mid-600 range, so hopefully that's a bottom. The small area projections through the year 2016, we see 65 of the 78 attendance zones growing. Okay, 65 of 78. The largest growth we see was in Barrington, Blanton, Graham, and Linder. And Linder's the only school in that group that's south of the river. All the middle schools should grow. All the high schools should grow. Now, that presents a little bit of a challenge because if we've got we got 11 high schools and 17 or 18 middle schools, and if they're all going to grow, that means that we're not getting the growth concentrated in one area or another. It's being dispersed across the district, which will present a little bit of a challenge with regard to citing new schools. So that's the end of what I was prepared to discuss with you all tonight. And I have, like I said, Eldon and Ryan. Eldon's the one on the left, Ryan's the one on the right. Eldon's with a firm called Metro Study. His firm has been providing us with the housing start data for I don't know how many years, long time. And then, of course, Ryan is the city demographer, and both these gentlemen have come down here a number of times to meet and greet with you folks and maybe elaborate on some of the things that I didn't hit real well.
So are we going to move to staff talking about what the implications of all this are? Okay, so I'll make sure that if there's questions for Dennis on the macro level, that people can ask those before we shift. If does anybody have any questions on, just to make sure that while we're still here, rather than trying to go back and understand the basis. Mr. Guzman.
Just in general, what is the highest growth area in the district, and what is the lowest?
Okay, at which level?
Elementary.
Okay. According to this slide right here, 3 of those 4 schools that I listed here, Barrington, Blanton, and Graham, are in the northeast quadrant. They're kind of all coupled up there together. Linder is is south of the river. That would be the only, and I'm just talking about the top ones, but I didn't aggregate it in another way, it's just those zones.
So then those 3, in that the area that those 3 are in is the highest,
Yes, sir.
and then, well, where Linder is, it wouldn't be the lowest because it's got.
No, it's the 4th in that series
Yeah.
of 4.
So then the others, wherever the accumulation is, would be the lower than those.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
actually, the lower, I wasn't prepared for that question in that form, but the low enrollment change is in the center of the district,
Okay.
the older urban core, if you will.
What most people consider central Austin.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
In either direction.
Both north and south. If you go back to that very first map that I showed you with population change, the pink areas were in the center part of the district, both north and south, like you said.
In terms of the single-family housing development, do you have a trend for apartment development as well?
Apartments, and I'll let Ryan come in after me, if you will. The apartments went down dramatically, but they're going back up dramatically. And you get a lot of press about it, but a lot of those apartments are either in central Austin, downtown central Austin, and we don't get much student population out of central Austin. And then a lot of the rest of them are at the periphery. So, Ryan's my apartment guru. Would you mind elaborating on that?
And within your question, if you could identify which of those, or at least family, 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, at least where family would be.
Sure.
Adequately a dwelling adequate for family.
Sure. I think it's worth noting that currently, market-wide, the multifamily occupancy is 96%, which is really unheard of. I mean, so many other parts of the country have got empty housing stock and have got empty apartments. And as a result of this extremely high occupancy, The development community has responded by last quarter. They submitted almost 5,000 new units to the City of Austin for review. Of course, probably not all of those units will make it to market. It will be contingent on finding funding. But I think directly to your point about the 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom apartment, and then also in relation to this table 12, to me, one of the central elements that you guys are faced with in terms of what a challenge is that your single-family housing starts may be declining, but your enrollment continues to grow. And much of this enrollment comes from not new housing stock at all, and not even necessarily 3-bedroom apartments, but it's large families moving, or just families, not even large families, but medium-sized families and large families moving into units that were formerly occupied by singles and couples. And so I think a good example is the area around Lanier High School. I mean, there hasn't been any new housing stock put in there in 25, 30 years, and yet it's one of your great pressure points. And I think sort of going forward, this is going to be one of the great challenges that Dennis and staff are going to be faced with, because at one point I had this very job in Gwinnett County, which is outside of Atlanta, and it was extremely easy because we simply looked at the new single-family stock that came in, we had a factor, and we were able to predict it very accurately. Well, this is a far more complicated urban environment, and of course Gwinnett County has changed as well. So I hope that that answers your question, is that multifamily, while certainly it was multifamily development was strong in 06 and 07, it has since tracked somewhat consistently with single family, but it's surging back again. And I think that's going to be our challenge going forward, is not only predicting and tracking where the new stock is, but trying to come up with some type of predictive model. Is, can we predict the next Lanier neighborhood area? Can we predict the next Riverside Drive, where you've got really a surge of young children into these areas where there really hadn't been new construction?
Just one more. And what about the index, the affordable housing index? How do you work that in terms of the growth pattern and the trend?
Well, in many times, if you're talking about Section 8 or tax credit projects, I think that as a general rule, those apartments are going to be attractive to families, if that's the kind of correlation that you're trying to build. Is that what you mean, sir? Okay. And that type of information is available. We could geocode that by attendance area, and we could come up with an inventory of affordable housing by zone, if that would sort of help.
Yeah, Ryan, we actually have we have the kids per unit by apartment complex, and it goes way up. I mean, when you get to some of the what do we call it, the Austin Housing Authority, the number of kids per unit is extremely high, well over half a kid per unit, whereas overall, the number of kids per apartment unit is down around 0.3. And actually, some of them go higher than that. I don't have the numbers right here in front of me, but we do have a database with all the apartment complexes, the number of units. We don't have it broken out by 1, 2, and 3 bedroom, but you can tell which ones have a lot more bedrooms because the number of kids goes way up.
Well, I think my interest, and I think the interest of the district, would be affordable housing in the areas where we have schools, and maybe under-enrolled schools, for that matter. And the reason, a lot of the reason that they're under-enrolled is because families have moved out due to lack of affordable homes. And so I'm not sure, that's not in your bailiwick, but what the city is doing with regard to maybe moving the growth or the permitting of housing in that direction by design.
Well, on that note, I think I'm compelled to at least mention the city's new comprehensive plan, Imagine Austin. One of the primary components is to try and do that very thing, to try and attract growth into activity centers, and through that clustering, create a mix of housing types, a mix of income, of housing prices, and really try and get at this affordability issue, because I couldn't agree more, is that because housing in the central city has become so much more expensive, that's one of the factors that is pushing families out of the urban core. And one of many factors.
Yeah.
And so the city is aware of it, we're trying to do something about it, and it's a critical piece of the new comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Ryan, is that you? Your name's Ryan, right? So, Sam, when you were talking about affordable housing, at first we were talking about Section 8 and other government subsidized housing, like the housing that the Austin Housing Authority or the Travis County Housing Authority. But also, I think when we were talking about affordable housing, I think, Ryan, I heard you sort of go down the direction of maybe affordable housing for middle income. Maybe in this last scenario that you described for the city. So what I'm very interested in knowing more about is how are we going to get to affordable housing for the middle income families who don't particularly want to live, in the outer donut of the district or the city, but really do want to be in the inner city. For example, housing apartments down on Riverside. Right there by where Lakeshore comes off of Riverside, there's a complex there. And my daughter, who's a teacher, is moving in there. Well, it's in a 1,000 square foot apartment, $1,600 a month. Wow. Got to pay a chunk to have a cat. But anyway, my point is that, and that's 1,000 square feet for $1,600. And so because I know that there's been, when those apartments came down off of Lakeshore, and there was conversation about the city was requiring the developers to put affordable housing in there for those people who were displaced. How do we get more affordable housing, not just for low-income residents, but for the middle-income resident to be able to live where they want to live and not be house poor?
I think that you have hit upon the great challenge of our time, because it's not, it's as you say, it's affordable housing for those middle brackets. I think the historic model has been trying to provide affordable housing for really lower income families, but I think increasingly we're going to try and do this thrust that you're talking about. I'd love to maybe get together with some of my colleagues from our housing department and do maybe a special presentation, bring in folks that deal with that very question every day, along with maybe some of the comprehensive planning staff. Because again, that, I go back to Imagine Austin, that's one of the critical themes that they have tried to get to as to, what is Austin going to look like 20 years from now? And I think your example of that apartment, Dennis mentioned that the housing stock was demolished and it's being replaced, but it's being replaced with much more expensive units. And so it's a crunch for us. I don't have a good straightforward answer, but it's something that we spend time and energy on, and I'd like to maybe set up something where we can bring in the housing folks and get into that in detail.
Well, I'd be very interested in that if the calendar committee could add that to the list of things, because like Sam was saying, that's one of the issues that's affecting our inner city, enrollment and population of our schools is the fact that, as we all know, so many people cannot afford to live in the inner city anymore. And so, a house that 35, 40 years ago was bought for $18,000 is now selling for $600,000, and it's just cuckoo. But so, I just think that there needs to be something more done. I know there's a lot of conversation, but in order for the school district to be able to plan, we need to be able to have affordable housing across the district so that we don't have concentration up in North Central off of Lamar at Lanier in the Lanier attendance zone, or so that it's not in some other part of town where the services that they need are not there. So that would be great if we could do that at some point.
Other questions at this point, just at the macro level? Make an observation, and I had the benefit of hearing Ryan and others present at the CAN, Community Action Network, where it was really a bigger picture. It wasn't just focused on school. But this issue of sort of, we look at birth rates, we look at housing starts, or we look at even housing stock and occupancy, and then we look at maybe what's the level of affordable housing. But it was really, because of the census, you really had a point in time to see where do people live. And it was pretty, which haven't seen, but here it's really pretty powerful, because it showed you, and you could almost do by the attendance zone, but it showed you where poverty was, where demographic trends were going, where density was increasing, the population shifts, and there was a noticeable difference in looking at, and they were really looking at Austin and Travis County, and actually the bigger region, but when you look at AISD, it's pretty powerful because it's not only the kids that are in school, but somewhat it's the neighborhoods that are surrounding the schools and what's happening, that we need to understand what that means in terms of community support, neighborhood engagement, and there's some pretty powerful trends that come into play about that too. When we think about the support that school and maybe others need to provide to the students that are in our school. And particularly because of the mobility, which we haven't talked about, is even kids that live in one place and go to school someplace else, which is an entirely different issue. But I think that's a pretty powerful message that you guys provided that might be helpful for us to see as we start planning about the district. It's not just where kids are and where they're born, but where they go to school, but what's happening to the neighborhoods around the schools that we have, and what does that mean, if anything, for us. But on some of the analysis they showed, you could see some pretty strong trends in our community that were putting challenges for us as a community to provide strong neighborhoods in every place. And I think to your observations about where we see density in some parts of town without a housing stock going up, but what does that mean, and what do we do about that, and how do we deal with it? And sometimes it's affordable housing, but some of this we can look at birth rates and new students, but there's some longer term trends I think that are going to be influenced a lot by what the census data tells us. And I don't know if you have any observations about that, but that may be, what you guys at least showed at that meeting I thought was pretty compelling.
And I think that's why Dennis has brought in the American Community Survey data, because it's a whole nother facet. And again, I think, going forward, it's something that we're going to be needing to spend more and more time with.
And I think I know the city's actually reached out, but as we do the Imagine Austin and the coordinated planning, and what does all that mean? I think the city of Austin is trying to look at that census data and say, what does that mean? And how do we actually, you may remember our community committee on neighborhood and schools and our families and children's task force and all, but how do you actually accomplish that when all this other stuff's happening? It's one thing, it's great to have the concept, but actually, how do you actually do it and over what time frame? And I think to Lori's point, affordable housing means different things to different people. People look at Miller sometimes as affordable housing, but for a lot of families, that's not affordable housing to them. And the concentrations of poverty, and the reason we have density in North Central is because those families are often those that can't afford the affordable housing that's like someplace at Miller. They're looking for a different type of affordable housing. Okay, sorry. So do we want to transition to the school impacts of all this?
Right, and Mr. Fryer, are you doing that, or Beth? Welcome, Beth.
Happy New Year, Beth.
Happy New Year. Just going to switch out presentations here.
I'm
real
going to,
fast.
Eldon and Ryan, I think can get out of here. Does anybody have anything else? I think you guys can bolt, right?
We know how to get a hold of them.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Okay, so this presentation is about the population information that Dennis gave you and how that impacts our schools. What I want to note is, as we went through in November, the difference between population and enrollment, permanent capacity and functional capacity, what I want to just make very, very clear here at the beginning here, that this is talking about population, so where students live. It does not talk about enrollment, so it doesn't talk about where those students go to school. And we are comparing that with the permanent capacity of the school, not including any of the portables or any of those other factors that we apply to that. So to reiterate what Dennis was telling us, out of the 78 elementary school attendance zones that we have, 65 of them are projected to increase in population over the next 5 years. 16 elementary schools are projected to increase by more than 50 students over the next 5 years. And you can see a number of the schools, 4 schools in particular, Blanton, Barrington, Graham, and Linder, are projected to increase by more than 100 students over the next 5 years. 13 of the 78 elementary schools are projected to have either no growth or a decline in population. And only 1 elementary school is showing a decline in population of more than 50 students. And in this case, that's Mills, which is actually a good thing. We're seeing now the bubble of students that were at the elementary level causing some overcapacity issues at Mills are now aging through the system. So we'll see their numbers in the 2 middle schools in the high school that school will track to. Based on the 2016-17 population projections, 10 of our elementary schools will be between the 115 and 125% permanent capacity. 13 will be between the 125 and 150% of permanent capacity, and 11 schools will be over 150% permanent capacity. All the schools, the overcapacity schools are seen in all areas of the district except for the east portion of the district. I'll go through each sort of region of the district just so we can look at which individual schools are projected to be above 125% of their permanent capacity. So in the Northwest, we'll see Doss continue to increase up to 174% of their permanent capacity. North Central, again, this is something that we've been experiencing over the past 10 years, and it will continue to get more dense in that area. We'll see 7 schools in the North Central part of the district being above 125% permanent capacity. That being Barrington, Cook, McBee, Pillow, Walnut Creek, Wooldridge, and Wooten. And I just wanted to make a note in here that as this report was written and Dennis's calculations were calculated prior to the adoption of the AAFRs for next year, they do not reflect any of those boundary changes like we will see in Barrington, but those changes will be reflected in next year's report, and the boundaries will be adjusted appropriately.
Beth, does this include the elementary school that's already designated for North Central?
No.
Not the one that we just did in the AFR, but the one that's being to be built?
No, it does not. Because we don't have boundaries for that new,
Okay.
for the 2004 bond program school, we can't identify which students will be at which school, but it is anticipated that that new elementary school will provide relief for Walnut Creek, McBee, and possibly Wooldridge.
Okay.
So there may be a solution for those schools with that new 2004 school when it opens. And then the 2008 bond program, we're hoping could provide relief for Cook, Wooldridge, and possibly Wooten. There is also a possibility of 8 classroom addition at Cook. So those are all mechanisms that we could employ to help with the overcapacity schools in that area. Northeast elementary schools, we'll see 7 elementary schools that are above 125% permanent capacity, being Andrews, Blanton, Graham, Harris, Hart, Overton, and Pickle. And again, our efforts to relieve some overcapacity issues at Graham and Hart are not reflected in this study, nor will they be reflected in next year's study because it does not involve boundary changes. That's just a change of assignment of a grade level. So you'll continue to see the population numbers high, although we know that we are addressing each school's enrollment through the reassignment of students. One school in the Southwest, Patton Elementary, is projected to be over 125%. And in the South Central, we'll see 3 schools, Baranoff, Odom, and Pleasant Hill. In Southeast, there will be 5 elementary schools over 125% capacity, and actually 3 of those schools at above 150% of their permanent capacity, being Blazier, Langford, Linder, Perez, and Rodriguez. And again, the new Early Childhood Center at Linder should help in relieving Linder Elementary School. But again, since that is a reassignment of student grade level and not a boundary change, you won't see the change in population numbers, but you certainly will see the change at the campus level. Now looking at schools that will be under 75% of their permanent capacity. We will have 10 elementary schools by 2016-17 that will be under 75% of their permanent capacity. And again, I just want to remind you that these are population numbers not enrollment numbers. We do know that at many of our schools that no longer have large numbers of students living in the neighborhood, they do receive a number of students through transfers. So I want to make sure that we're beyond that. Or not there yet, sorry. So in central Austin, we'll see 3 schools, Becker, Dawson, and Lee. And in East Austin, we'll see 6 schools, Allen, Blacksher, Campbell, Norman, Ortega, and Zavala. Again, the AAFRs for 12-13 are not reflected in this report, but will be reflected in subsequent reports. And in South Central, there's only 1 school under 75% capacity, being Boone Elementary. Going to the secondary schools, as Dennis reported, we are seeing sort of this large elementary population now is going through the system, and we are seeing growth at all of our middle schools. 10 middle schools will have an increase of more than 100 students over the next 5 years. The largest being Murchison, Burnett, and Fulmore. So based on the 5-year projections, 3 middle schools, Garcia, Lamar, and Small, will have 75% or less of their permanent capacity. 2 middle schools, Fulmore and Mendez, will be between 115 and 125%. And 4 middle schools, Betachek, Burnett, and Martin, and Murchison, will be between 125 and 150. I did want to note, one of the things that we did change in this presentation this year was adjusted the population of Keeling and Fulmore middle schools to take into account the number of students that they have sort of reserved, spaces that they have reserved for their magnet program. So we went ahead and added those into the populations at those schools.
Sorry to interrupt you, but just, does that mean you took them out of where they come from today, or are they double counted?
No, they're somewhat double counted.
Because if they're in population of their home school
Right.
plus.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But since they're spread out throughout the whole district,
Okay.
and then again, at our high schools, all our high schools are anticipated to grow over the next 5 years, with 4 high schools being projected more than 250 students over the next 5 years, being Aikens, Anderson, Lanier, and Reagan. Again, these are population numbers, not enrollment numbers. 2 high schools, which would be LBJ Lassa and Reagan, will be between 115 and 125%. And 2 high schools, Aikens and Lanier, will be between 125 and 150. And again, we did the adjustment to the population for Lassa at LBJ. And that is the end of the information I had to present to you.
Okay, a lot here. Thank you very much. I don't know,
To answer any questions.
I know school has just started, so thank you for putting together a lot of work, probably maybe even over the holidays. So let's open this up for comments or questions at this point. Mr. Torres?
Thank you very much, Ms. Wilson and Mr. Fryer. Appreciate all your work. And I know we have to somehow use the data to give us a feel. There certainly appears to be, in general, a growth or an increase, or we're assuming that these numbers will translate into an increase in the enrollment, actually, but we don't really have a sense of which ones may follow the trend,
Correct.
which ones may actually lose some. So I guess in terms of how we use these data, how would you say we would be best to try and read these tea leaves as we look at the numbers, recognizing that some schools may lose some of those folks to a private school or to some other school within the area, and others may actually increase larger than these percentages for other reasons as well. So how do we use these data for planning purposes?
Right. And actually, I'd like to make a clarification. These are all AISD students, so
At the moment.
at the moment, right. We may lose them
It's a
at some
snapshot in
point.
time.
It is a snapshot in time. And I would say that it's a starting.
Well, I'm sorry, but the population numbers that we're dealing are not necessarily.
They are.
They're within AISD, but they're not necessarily ISD students.
No, I'm sorry, that is a confusion. Dennis's total population did talk about all students.
Right.
Or all people.
Right.
When he starts talking about student population, and when I start talking about student population, they are AISD students. So they are not the 8% that either are homeschooled or
They're
private.
projected to be AISD students. We're still talking about the future, so they
Correct.
may not.
Correct, based on current AISD
Okay.
students.
I'm sorry, go ahead, you were saying.
Oh, I was saying that, this is really just a starting point. First, we need to see if there are any major changes in growth trends that we need to pay attention to. I think most of the things that were reported in this report have fallen in line with trends of the past. So I don't think that there's any big surprises there. I think what we next need to do is, I always say that we kind of have to look through two set of glasses. The first set of glasses to sort of look at the population and our permanent buildings with sort of this long-range vision, and then to take the same information and translate it to, okay, what does that mean based on a number of years of trends? What does that mean to the actual enrollment of the school? What does that mean to how the school is functioning today in terms of how many portables does the building have, how many students migrate in and out, what are those sort of effects? And you sort of have to look at that group of data, and then you have to somehow merge them both together and look at the long range and the short range, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess that's what's hard for me to try to
It is. It is
know.
difficult.
keep the two together, and then at the same time,
Right.
we look at some of the areas within the district that, as you said, or some of the demographers indicated, the housing areas built out,
Correct.
but yet we continue to see increases in population of school-age children.
Right. And that's probably
and-
the most difficult thing for us to project.
Right, and the two areas that obviously stand out with regard to my schools are Pillow, Doss, Murkison, Anderson. And yet they're in areas that are, quote, built out.
Right. I think in those areas that you referred to, particularly Doss, I think what we're seeing in those areas is not new housing, but recycling of a neighborhood. Some of the homes are now, the original owners are now, no more family at home, empty nesters. Maybe they're moving into a smaller place, and then the house is that now being purchased by a family with children. So we're starting to see some of those older neighborhoods begin this recycling sort of process.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments on this information? Okay, well, thanks for presenting. I got a couple for you. One, I just want, when I look at the numbers of elementary school growth for Blanton and Maplewood, at least from what I hear about the projected development of Miller, they seem low in terms of, it's like showing 180 kids more over the next 5 years than what we have today. And I know they have hundreds of units that are coming in, and it seems like they'd have at least one kid. It's pretty family-oriented, so the numbers seem low, but I know you all are probably looking at that. Second thing, I'm going to suggest a couple of things for your presentations for future reference. One of which is, you've got 75 to 115. I think we probably need to maybe go 75 to 95 and 95 to 115 or something else to get us, because I think as we're starting to look at this thing over the longer term, that's a pretty big range, 75 to 115. And there can be some pretty dramatic between someone who's 76 and someone who's 114. I mean, but the implication is that they're sort of all in that green bucket, which I think there's, and particularly as we start looking at trends, if they're moving down and becoming more green, which is particularly as these areas where there's some blue, it's trying to understand where that is. And I can see when you break it out by school, some of the percentages are much closer to a lower number, 75, than they are to the higher end. But seeing that, third, this is small, but I'm going to suggest you switch your colors. I know we added yellow late. I'm going to suggest you do yellow, pink, and then red, so that red is the hottest as opposed to the yellow is the hottest, although that's the sun, I realize, and that's bright red, but I think perception-wise. And then just to make clear, this is the population AISD somewhere, which is different from our enrollment, which is different than our transfers, which is different where kids move. But one of the things I think we talked about that came up earlier was this idea of in-migration, which is the increased density, which is hard to calculate, 5 years out, because what we're seeing is, we can look at our sort of student enrollment, we can look at our growth in our number of kids, we can look at, when you look at that number of birth rates and how many kids that translate to elementary school. But I think what we're seeing, I don't know if there's a way to calculate, is what's the growth from the kids that are new to AISD that Dennis was talking about, that's sort of the in-migration every year, separate from the kids who are leaving, and all, but just, are we seeing a component of our enrollment growth that's due to some sort of density increase that's not necessarily tracking to housing starts, birth rates, that kind of stuff, capacity, but just really this density. And I don't know how you factor that in there, but I'm worried when I see North Central, how yellow and red it already is. And what we've known is that area has continued to have an increased density every year with no new housing stocks. And this is based on what we know, and it's probably going to be worse than this, is my guess, 5 years out, if the existing pattern continues. I don't know if there's a way to factor that in. Maybe that's too imprecise, but maybe we just need to highlight that we don't know yet, and it could be worse than that. And so I maybe as we start thinking about that, as we look at regions or buckets, which I think you've done a good job of describing East, maybe it's sort of what's the aggregate over/under for an area, because therefore we don't have to get as precise by elementary school. It may be on addition, but not to the exclusion. When you look at North Central, for example, with the designation of the AFRs, we may not know till the boundaries, but we probably can do a projection that overlays that says, here's how many, this is what our over or under for all the seats are in the aggregate, even if we haven't done the boundary. So if we know we're adding 800 seats next year and we're going to add 800 seats a couple years from now, what would that do by 16, 17 in terms of the overall area, even though we may not know exactly by attendance zone, because as we start trying to plan for future, but we got to figure out what's the longer term area concerns we need to be dealing with. Ms. Moya, thank you very much.
Mr. Williams, I think it's possible that the percentage range 75 to 115 may be in the framework that was approved. So perhaps if there are some
Yeah, so can we just,
so can we
what
just
is approved in the framework around how this relates to capacity?
Okay, so maybe rather than change it, perhaps there's a way to put some kind of a spotlight on those that are close to hitting the high mark, or something to be on a watch list or something like that, rather than maybe changing it up since we did approve that recently.
Okay, I mean, it's fine if y'all want to leave it with that. I just think for me, I think the framework's not cast in stone. So if it makes sense to look at it differently, I'm certainly open to that if y'all think it's not helpful. But when I look at some of the parts of town, particularly the east, where you see lots of blue and lots of green, but most of the green is less than 100% and actually probably trending down. It's like they may be blue soon, but you can't tell because it could be someone that's 114 or someone that's 75 or 80. So it's just, maybe if there's some way we can try to understand how that plays out. Maybe it's fine to leave it green, but we're going to have to look at it a more granular in the future.
We'll figure out something.
Maybe it's 2 shades of green.
And I know the 75 to 115 was really about, do we have to add, but I think as we're trying to do planning, it's different than building. It's trying to understand which, and I think we're looking at a broader neighborhood or geographic area, demographic patterns happening over time.
I just think
Yeah.
sometimes things can get real confusing, so we just need to try to keep it as consistent
I
as
agree.
possible,
That's fair.
or make an adjustment, or something, just so that it's not confusing to everybody.
Yeah, I may be the only one for which that it just feels like it's a broad range. And sometimes in concept on the framework, until you actually see it in practice, it's hard to really see what it means. And when I start looking at the specific percentages, there's a big difference on some of them. Okay, any other questions or comments on this area? Thank you all very much. Okay, we've got some additional guests. Welcome. We're going to now move on to the development of the district capital improvements and bond advisory committee work. And hopefully we'll get
Mr.
you guys out of here in a reasonable time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Mr. Frazier, Mr. Hawkins, legends.
Mr. President, trustees of the board, as part of the facility master plan administrative recommendation that was presented to the board on September 26th, the administration
Miss, did she just leave the room? Okay, yeah, we got to pause, sorry.
Vincent.
Oh, Vince back, okay.
that five?
That's 5, thanks. So if y'all step away, I mean, we all know this, but if there's only 5 of us here, please don't leave. Okay.
As part of the administrative recommendation on September 26, we recommended that the board appoint its Citizens Bond Advisory Committee to begin the determination of a scope of work for a future bond. But in response to that request, the board created instead the Capital Improvement and Bond Planning Advisory Committee to evaluate all capital improvement needs of the district, carefully consider any data and information, and deliberate multiple areas of academic and operational considerations in order to provide a recommendation to the superintendent, who would then recommend a position to the board. The board asked for an update on CIB-PAC, CIB-PAC, which is going to be provided to you this evening. I'd like to welcome again our COO, Lawrence Fryer, and our 2 co-chairs, Richard Frazier and Albert Hawkins, who have joined us this evening to provide the update. And so it's about a 5-minute update, and we're available for questions.
President Williams, board members, Dr. Karstafen. The purpose of this discussion is to provide an update on the development of the Capital Improvement and Bond Planning Advisory Committee, or CIB-PAC. And as Dr. Karstafen said, at the October 10th, 2011 work session, some options were presented, and the choice made was to form the CIB-PAC, Contingency or Capital Improvement and Bond Planning Advisory Committee, which is attachment 1, shows how that fits into the structure in relation to a CBAC. Also, in your package, you have the charge, and the charge of the CIB-PAC is to evaluate all capital improvement needs of the district and provide recommendations to the superintendent. And in developing those recommendations, this committee is to carefully consider any information provided by the administration. Other items along with the charge, just continuing, and this is straight from the committee's document, they're to look at current and projected future growth, school overcrowding and underutilization, student transportation, technology, health and safety, community and regional plans. It's just some of them, and again, that's in attachment 2, has more details regarding the CIB-PAC's charge. Continue on the planning, capital improvement bond planning committee. They will make recommendations to the superintendent regarding the need for capital program needs. And then once the recommendation is made, the superintendent will present that to the board, who will ultimately decide whether or not to establish a Citizens Bond Advisory Committee to determine what the priority needs of the district are for inclusion as far as the scope of work that would go into a future bond program. So the current committee has 22 members. I'm joined by the 2 chairs here today. The membership, as requested by the board, reflects the geographic, ethnic, cultural, and economic diversity of the district, and it includes a balanced perspective of parents, community members, and expertise in related areas such as business, finance, land development, and construction. And this committee also includes district employees from campuses and from the central office. The key support staff supporting the committee are myself, Paul Turner, who's the Executive Director of Facilities, and Kurt Shaw, who's the Director of Construction Management. There will be 4 full committee meetings, and the chairs will present at a work session on the 5th, and then the recommendation is scheduled to go at the regular board meeting on March 26th. In communications touchpoints, updates will be provided through the board weekly updates, and then, of course, we'll have the board work session, and then the recommendation, but there'll also be a CIPAC website on which we'll post minutes, and there will be opportunities for public input during the committee meetings. So that provides my update as far as the committee, and we're available for questions.
Okay, well, thank you, gentlemen, for taking on what many would consider to be somewhat of a thankless task, but y'all are troopers for hanging in there. Richard wanted another go at this thing, so you are a godsend to us. Thank you. Let's open up for comments, questions, or any clarification about the task force. Okay, I want to make sure that the task force, I'm sorry, the committee. So, but this committee, you talked about the recommendation and coming to the board, but the recommendation is really going to the superintendent, and the superintendent will in turn make the recommendation to the board. And therefore, everybody, I just want to make sure everybody understands that this is the superintendent's committee,
Advisory committee.
advisory committee. Does anybody want to while these guys came, do we want to ask them questions? Thank you for doing it. I feel bad. Do you all have any observations? I mean, do you feel like this is going to work well? Do you have any concern?
Looking group, we're real excited about it. Got to meet,
Talking the mic.
been real happy to meet Mr. Hawkins. He's a legend.
Absolutely.
And,
Well, at least in my own mind.
and
A few others as well.
We've had a couple of meetings, and I've already learned a lot, and I suspect that I'll learn quite a bit more from him. And there's a lot of really interesting and knowledgeable folks on this committee, including a board member, and so we're excited about getting to work. I think it'll be good.
We're looking forward to getting started. We've had a chance to begin some of the planning for the Planning Advisory Committee and understand the timeline and the charge that has been, and the charter that's been developed. And so we're ready to roll up our sleeves and start working at it. Yes, sir.
Do you all have any questions or concerns that you want the board to be thinking about or addressing at this point, or we'll wait till we get a little bit farther downstream and you can let us know?
Yeah, we'll move it into place a little bit and see what the dynamics are.
Well, I appreciate Dr. Christopher, you taking this on, because I think it's the right move for us as a district to have you taking the ownership for whatever recommendations come out of that, working with this very talented group of chairs and a committee. So please express our appreciation to your committee as well. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And go watch some football.
Okay, can I do 2 quick
Please.
things? I just want to remind the public and everyone that the first full committee meeting, the co-chairs have been great about meeting and planning in advance, 3 meetings now, but the first full meeting is on Tuesday, January the 24th. So I just wanted to remind people of that. And then also, because we have co-presidents for Education Austin, we need to include both on the membership list.
Okay.
So we have one, but not the other, and I just want to, that request was made right before the meeting, and I just wanted to be sure I said that, and that we were making it public that we were adding one more member, and that would be Ray Nuwasu. And then, and I don't think there are any other changes to the membership, so that's available in public.
Still need to confirm
posted.
that.
And that, well, it says confirmation pending, but that's public, so people will know. Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Very good. Thank you.
Second quarter, maybe.
Go, man. Dr. Christopher. I'm just going to.
Oh, okay. Nicole Conley Abram, could you please, no, wait, sorry, wrong group. Bond, wait, who's that? That's still Lawrence, right?
Okay.
He said go, I don't know. But can I just ask my staff, is it just you? Is it,
It's me and Kurt.
and Kurt Shaw?
Yeah.
Oh, there he is. Sorry, Kurt.
Greg Shields is here.
My bad.
Andrew's Curtis.
Okay.
We get on time, we get on time, we get on time, we get on time. Happy New Year, kids.
Okay, I need at least one more board member back here on the dais.
We're in the room, so keep going.
All right. I don't think so either. Okay,
Okay. Is this 5?
yes.
Great. Mr. President, trustees, members of the board, you have requested an opportunity as part of our calendar committee meetings to discuss the use of contingency funds remaining from the district's 2008 bond program. The administration has identified and prioritized a number of projects that would be eligible for funding, and some of the annual academic and facility recommendations that were approved in December of 2011 will also be considered as part of the bond contingency funds. Staff is available this evening to respond to your questions on the topic, but if you'll please flip to 6.1 in your tabs, you will see that, 6.7.1 in your tabs, the agenda item entitled 2008 Bond Contingency Funds. There are a couple of things I just wanted to make sure that people remembered and understood that you've asked for, that you have here, that I just wanted to highlight. In addition to our AAFR conversations, on page 5 in that agenda item, there are many, many, many other schools, as you can see, in the categories of HVAC, roofing, electrical, elevators, flooring, plumbing, that need about a $10.7 million allocation to be able to cover some of these things. And just to be clear, we're on a timeline that's really important for facilities to be able to get the bids out, to make sure that we are doing everything on time and in order so that we can get these things done in the spring and the summer in time for the start of the next school year. So the complete total is around $16 million-ish, if I'm still correct on the number. Or is it 19 point? No, 16. And there's approximately 19 million that's estimated, that's available for use in contingency funds. We have posted a public hearing notice for Monday, January the 23rd. So everything that we're supposed to do based on policy and statute and everything else is in order. But what's most important for tonight is to be sure, if you look at your agenda item, the guiding question for the discussion is to get the board feedback on the use of the bond funds, the surplus funds, and to be sure that everyone's aware of what we would be using the resources for out of the contingency dollars. So is there anything else that y'all want to add, or can we open it up for board discussion?
The only thing I would like to add is that we have representatives from the Bond Council here
Oh,
today,
yes, thank you.
also supporting us. And they'll be available if any questions are needed from them, any answers. Okay.
Okay, so for comments or questions, Ms. Torres?
Dr. Starfman, I guess I thought I understood maybe for this first meeting, there would be sort of a
walkthrough?
a summary of sort of how they got to this point, so we'll know what has been done to.
Yep, we can do that.
That would be helpful, I think.
Great, so do y'all want to cover that?
I can do
Great.
that. Okay, I can start there with the history and also provide a status of projects since the last presentation in March, and also the project list and how that was developed and the administrative recommendation. So just to start with the history of it, at the board work session on March 7, 2011, staff made a presentation to the board on the status of surplus contingency budget funds from both the 04 and the 08 bond programs. I made that presentation with assistance from Kurt Shaw, and of course, the Bond Council was also present for that presentation as well. So staff reviewed with the board the purpose of program level contingency, and the purpose of having contingency in a program is to be able to respond to unpredicted increases in construction and labor material costs. Also be there to continue to move forward when there are unavoidable but necessary changes to the scope of a project, and also to cover delays caused by external forces beyond the control that have additional costs. So staff at that time reviewed the 04 and 08 bond program contingency funds, and in March, The '04 bond program had a surplus of $3.4 million, and the '08 bond program had a surplus of $15.9 million. At that time, in March, several projects were yet to be initiated. From the '04 bond project, the new bus terminal, North Central Elementary School land purchase, North Central Elementary School, and the soccer fields. Those projects were yet to be initiated at that time. And also from the '08 bond program, the Performing Arts Center, undesignated elementary school land purchase, the Early Childhood Center, and the electrical power factor correction programs had not yet been initiated, nor had the land acquisition for the South High School from the '08 bond project. So as a result, in March, the staff's recommendation to the board was to defer the use of funds from the '08 bond program, which were approximately $3.4 million, due to the fact that we had some major remaining projects there, and we want to be able to better forecast whatever the contingency requirements might be for those projects. Now, relative to the '08 bond program, at that time, we had a contingency of $17.5 million, and staff recommended using a portion of those funds. The rationale for having that large amount of contingency was that these projects were developed with estimates from 2007, and at that time it was assumed that escalation of construction costs would increase, but that did not materialize. So now moving forward to where we are today, since March 7, 2011, a contract for the construction of the new bus terminal was awarded, and that project is within budget. We've also purchased the land for the new North Central Elementary School, and the schematic design for the North Central Elementary School has been developed, and you saw that today, and then we'll be bringing that back in a couple of weeks for the board's review. Also, since March 7, as part of the 2008 bond program, we've started construction of the new Linder Early Childhood Center. And the updated figures for contingency now, the '04 bond is still at about $3.7 million, but the '08 bond contingency has increased to a surplus projected at $19.4 million. And that is reflected in the pie chart that was included in the BWU last week. So at the board work session on October 10th, the Community Bond Oversight CBOC presented its quarterly report, and they discussed contingency for both the '04 and '08 bonds programs. And at that meeting, the board reviewed the CBOC chairs, reviewed the committee's role in determining the use of the surplus program contingency funds. So consistent with the process put forth by the board, staff was asked to prepare a list of projects for consideration by the board for implementation through the use of surplus contingency funds from the 2008 bond program. Staff was to ensure that the projects were aligned with board priorities and the district's strategic plan, and we were to remain true with the original intent of the bond program. The CBOC was then asked to review the list of potential projects and provide feedback to the superintendent, who in turn would present her recommendations to the board for its consideration. So as a result, and in attachment 1, you have the list of projects that Dr. Karstoffen referred to earlier. And that list came about by looking at the what is that? The FCI?
Yeah.
The Facility Condition Assessment Report, looking at that, and also working with our maintenance staff at the AISD Service Center. And the implementation of these projects is to make health and safety-related improvements to our facilities and restore or extend the useful life of critical building systems. So the list of projects that you have includes heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, HVAC renovations, installation of digital HVAC controls, replacement of plumbing and piping and restroom fixtures, replacement of electrical service equipment and other electrical systems, roof replacement work, replacing one elevator, and the repair and replacement of sanitary sewer piping in several elementary schools. Again, that attachment has a complete listing of the projects. And these projects are spread geographically across the district with a total cost estimated at $10.7 million, which includes construction costs, soft costs, and development expenses. We also have a map which we can put up on Elmo to show how they're geographically dispersed. So additionally, in attachment 2, there were also, well, on December 12th, and again on December 19th, the board approved 6 annual facilities recommendations, annual academic and facilities recommendations, AAFRs, and 4 of those require facilities renovations or improvements, site improvements, or additional portable classroom buildings. The total estimated cost for making these AAFR-related facility improvements is $5.4 million. And at the most recent CBOC meeting, the committee voted to recommend to the superintendent the use of the surplus 2008 bond program funds for the implementation of the staff proposed systemic repairs and renovations at 34 schools and 1 support facility. So at this time, the administration supports the CBOC's recommendation, and in addition, proposes for the board's consideration the use of the surplus 2008 bond program funds for the implementation of AAFR-related facilities improvements in the amount of $5.4 million for a total of $16.1 million. And lastly, a public hearing on the proposal for use of surplus 2008 bond program contingency funds is scheduled for January 23rd, 2012. And following that, the Board of Trustees is posted to take action as necessary. So that concludes my run back, covering the history, telling you how we got to this point.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Torres.
So, Mr. Fryer and Mr. Shaw, everything on the list then are critical health and safety need type items as determined by the facilities condition index for those systems using standard procedures for purposes of the FCI number that was used.
Yes, sir.
And this may be a math issue, but you mentioned, Mr. Fryer, that there was 3.7 surplus from the 2004 and 19 from the 2008, but we're only proposing how the 19 million. Can you summarize how the 3.7 million is being used from the 2004? Or did I understand you correctly, first of all?
Yes, you did. And the thinking behind using the 08 bond funding contingency was because there was a much larger amount, and even going up to that amount, we would still show over $3 million in contingency remaining in the 08 contingency bucket. As far as the 04 bond, a few major projects are yet to be completed, so the CBOC and the staff didn't feel comfortable moving it forward when, there was much less room to maneuver with that 04 bond until those projects were nearer to completion.
So there is a possibility that you may come back to us at some point with some suggestions for how that money should be spent?
Yes.
Okay. And then is it your recommendation then that the balance, the 3 million or so in the 2008 bond, that we continue to keep that the way it is until we finish out some of the rest of the 2008 projects?
Yes. Yes, that is what we're going to be recommending. And at this point, it is anticipated that that 3 million may grow a little further, but that is until we get closer to the end of those 08 bond projects as well.
Okay, and then my last question, I apologize for dominating things here, but you mentioned the soft costs, the material costs. You didn't mention any sort of a contingency within these projects. Is there some sort of contingency as well within these projects?
Yeah, there are project-level contingency funds that are in there for the changes that you might expect for things that we discovered during the course of construction that would need to be augmented, have some augmented funding to them. But because the proposal is to get both, as Dr. Karstafen mentioned, both the renovation work, the air conditioning work and plumbing work and roofing work, get that accomplished this summer, just like the AAFRs, is we don't have the escalation factor in there
Sure.
that would normally be covered by the overall contingency, but we do have project-level contingency included in that soft cost.
For the uh-ohs. right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can you give me an idea of what the program space to be created for Lanier and Travis for the Graduation Pathways program would be? What is that?
The schools, both of schools at this point have identified areas that they are going to allow us to be developed or to be developed for them for those the credit recovery. We hope to be able to accomplish that within existing space with some minor modifications, and the administration of those schools has got that space already identified for us. I have not personally know exactly where it's located, but they are on out in front in determining where the best location for that is. What they do need is exterior access, because there's going to be some extended hours where that program is going to be carried out. So we have to have exterior access that will allow that to take place.
So it's part of the existing buildings, we're not relocating or adding portables?
That's not anticipated, no, ma'am.
Okay. And then on the alternative education learning support centers, we're saying interior improvements to secondary facilities. What would those look like?
They would be, and maybe the term we'll use is not going to be as accurate as it should be, but it's really the restoration of space within the existing structure that will allow the children or the students that have been moved for discretionary purposes to be concentrated in that area, and they can confine their activities and give them the kind of consolidated direction that they'll need for their academic progress while they're in that status.
So we're not going to be adding portables or anything to those facilities either. We're just going to be working with what we've got.
We don't anticipate having to do that. We have the flexibility, and we have approval from, or at least acknowledgement that it's an acceptable expense. If in fact we have to add a portable for some reason, we would be able to do that with the funds. But it's our anticipation that we'll be able to accommodate that learning support within the existing facility.
So if at the worst case scenario, a portable would be put on that property, one of those campuses, would they be relocated, portables from other campuses, not purchasing new ones?
No, ma'am. We still continue to have some shuttered portables from our energy conservation and the exercise we went through last summer. So we'll be deploying our own portables. And you'll see that, or at least I'll mention now that where we're going to the portable villages that we anticipate at both Dobie and Webb, those are going to be our own units as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions or comments? Oh, Dr. Karstafen.
So I have a question about the plumbing section. I know that Allison, with their sewer lines, have had some challenges for a while. And I was surprised to see that, Langford may indeed need the water pressure valve, but it maybe not for plumbing reasons or others. I mean, I've been there multiple times. That school still seems to have some challenges, serious challenges on, I can't even say that it would be structural or otherwise, but, the gaps and things.
Yes.
And it has a smell too, so I've just wondered, a little bit more about Langford and Hart. To me, if I recall correctly, it had sort of an Allison issue with a little bit of a sewer challenge. Have those things been resolved at the other two schools, or
Yes.
or why isn't?
At Hart, that was primarily the use of the lift stations that we had for the portables that were out there. And when we did the classroom addition at Hart, we were able to abandon those, we were able to discontinue the use of portables, and we ran as an adjunct project, we ran a new sanitary sewer line and connected it down to the south so that we didn't have to rely on any kind of lift stations to move our sewage. It's all gravity flow now.
Great. Anything about Langford?
Langford, that is some expansive soil that we had. We uncovered some of those conditions during the course of our construction. We kept running into undefined sewer lines, and that caused us to have to come in and do those repairs, do some rerouting, because our records weren't really good where that was. I believe that we have gotten that under control now. That was part of, we ran into several of those kind of conditions because of the expansion of that soil. We had a lot of lines that were affected by that. And so I think that was the main issue. But we got, with the construction of that classroom addition at Langford, I believe that we got the majority, if not all of that, the condition taken care of.
On page 8, under the plumbing section, there, one of the boxes is highlighted red. Was that just a leftover of something that wasn't, is that something
Yeah,
special?
that shouldn't have been there. And in
Okay,
fact,
thank
there's
you.
an updated version that apparently you didn't make it in there. That's a mistake.
Ignore the red.
Ignore the red.
Other questions or comments on this item? Okay, let me just work through with you a second. So I want to make sure, Mr. Torres was citing some numbers, I think you said them earlier, but I want to make sure. The material we got last week with the contingency, I think for 2004 had 3.3 million, and the 2008 had 17.1. Is that number now higher? Yes. Okay. And let's make sure, so what I understand, the open projects from the 2004 bond is the North Central Elementary School, which we had a schematic tonight, right? And the 2008 is the PAC and the new North Central Elementary School, which we haven't even started on yet, don't know what it's going to cost. And there's a certain amount. So pardon? And the land for the South High School. So those three things are, thank you, are still from 2008, for which we have not yet expended the money. If I understand you right, the 2008 bond contingency is 19 million. You're talking about spending 16 million of that against the 19. With those three items, the PAC, the North Central Elementary School, and the South High School land still being, the PAC we've actually decided we've got a path forward, but the other two we don't even know what those are going to be yet. So I guess just even though it's 16 to 19, it feels a little uncomfortable till we actually have two pretty big projects that are out there that we have some clear definition. We don't even know what kind of land we're going to do, how much that's going to cost. We've had land variances, and also the North Central Elementary School, we've talked about some of the information on adaptive reuse, buying additional property could cost more. How did you guys get confident to be able to relieve only 3 million out of that 19 for those two or those three very large projects?
We have anticipated the use of contingency fund for those projects. And it is, that 19 is a net number. We anticipate and have got pledged to the PAC a certain level of contingency funds. We've got the undesignated elementary school based on what our current costs for construction are, and then the unknown factor of, are we going to have to buy existing developed property and then do our adaptive reuse of that property for a school. We've anticipated some additional costs and have pledged, in our mind, have designated some of that contingency, for that. The land for the future South High School, we've done some analysis of what's available out there, what that cost is, both in the southeastern part of the district and the southwestern part of the district, and the numbers that we are seeing for the property that we've looked at that's been available, it's well within what we've got budgeted.
Okay, yeah, because I just don't want to get a situation where we basically use all the money, and then we come up and then we have to sub-optimize a couple of projects for which we committed to the voters we're going to do because we've already basically used all the program contingency.
No.
I'll come back to you in a second. Ms. Moya?
You caused me to think of something regarding the South Austin High School. I'm hoping that when you guys are doing your shopping around for things, that you're also considering adaptive reuse, because I think that it's very important that we consider that as well. Thank you.
We have dollars for the purchase of that land, so we may have the ability to purchase with something on it, but we won't have the ability to move forward on the adaptive reuse of that property until we get to the next bond program.
Okay, so in the 2008 bond, we had Phase 5, which was the technology, and we basically took it out. We said $69 million, and basically we spent it all, and I'm presuming that it doesn't imply we took any contingency against the 69. But I recall that when we first went through that program, the innovation stations, I know John's not here, but ended up costing more than we thought. We weren't able to buy as many as we anticipated. We didn't do as much. So yet we've not chosen to use any of the program contingency to fill out the technology phase that we didn't get all the way we needed to. Why was that decision made?
I think that decision was such that there is the hope that there are available some E-rate monies to be able to pick up and move forward with some of the innovation station work. There is the projects that staff believe were the most urgent and the most critical are the ones that were related to health and safety. And they were those that we continue to have to put operating dollars into to keep maintaining equipment that's gone past the end of its useful life. And so we believed as we spread it, and we didn't concentrate, our recommendation didn't concentrate all mechanical or all roofing or what have you. We tried to spread it across several of the disciplines. But all of the projects that are in there are priority one in our facility condition assessment database. And they are ones that we continue to have to pour operating M&O dollars into to keep them maintained. That's how we arrived at that.
Okay, and some of this I'm just trying to make sure, because
Sure.
I think that's building to my last thing, which is the fiduciary responsibility we have as part of the bond program. Because I think all these projects make sense. I can see why we're maybe making the trade-off of this versus additional technology. But I know we have Jerry Kyle and Greg Shields here from Andrews Kurth, because I think the issue is, can we legally do this within the bond program that we have? Because these are different projects. Some of these are probably consistent with the theme of the bond programs, whether it's 2004 or 2008. The 2008 was a narrower bond, and so it didn't cover every school. It wasn't as comprehensive as 2004. And Mel, I don't know if this is the right place, but I want to make sure that we are within our boundaries as far as the covenant that we made to be able to do this. Clearly, I think this is all stuff we need to do. If we can use the contingency for this kind of project instead of taking operating dollars out, that's a good thing. We know we need this work on our facilities to maintain them. But I guess I'm going to ask Jerry and Greg to come up and just say, can you guys address, if you're comfortable in a public session, and if there's something that you really feel like it's not, if we get into too much of the legal opinion stuff, it may not be public, but just kind of what you're comfortable with as far as what the staff has identified as recommendations, both as part of the fix-it-up stuff and as part of the AFRs, if in fact that is eligible to be covered under the bond programs that were approved by the voters.
Yes, sir. Jerry Kyle with Andrews Kurth. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Yes, we've worked very closely with district staff and provided advice and talked about different standards that apply in both making the determination of whether or not there's a surplus and then what that surplus can be used on. And I guess my short answer is I am comfortable with the analysis that the district staff has gone through to this point. And then we've looked at the AAFR and the contingency projects, and those appear to fit within the four corners of the propositions.
Okay, that's great. So I guess, and I'm sure y'all are working on, we've probably seen some drafts of just a letter that reflects that position, so that we are, as the district, done our due diligence from that standpoint to make sure that what we're taking to the public hearing and then ultimately maybe asked to vote on has been in fact basically been reviewed and given support based on that from the outside counsel.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, that'd be great. Other questions, Mr. Torres?
I have a hypothetical one, and this sort of speaks to Mr. Williams' comment about, because we're going to basically proceed forward, assuming the public approves and we agree that this is what we should do, and we move forward on it, you're going to proceed with post haste to actually try and get these projects implemented this summer. So we're basically going to spend all that money. And then let's just assume for some reason for the project remaining on the 2008 bond, we end up being short, which is what I think Mr. Williams was concerned with. Do we have a problem? And I guess you would have to say, well, which project is it? But if we had a project on the 2008, we all of a sudden found ourselves short money as we got into it, say the PAC, using money from the 2004 bond to help make that shortfall. Is that theoretically possible? Or would you actually have to see which project it is to be able to say with certainty?
It's really a fairly fact-specific analysis, so I would say I really would need to look at exactly what the proposal would be.
Or maybe let me ask it this way, which is what we always do with all of our personal checkbooks. We rob money to pay Paul. Would it be possible?
We prefer not to use the word rob in the context of
we borrow
of
money
taxpayer funds.
We go ahead and commit it out of 2008, but then if it turns out that we can pay for it out of 2008 funds, but maybe some of these projects could be paid for out of 2004 funds and end up paying for it out of the other way. Is that possible, or is that only done at home?
Just to restate the question, to the extent there are some projects on the table right now that are currently proposed to be paid for out of 2008 bond proceeds, and if there develops a shortfall in respect of a project that's to be paid for out of 2008 proceeds, but you have 2004 proceeds that could be used for those first projects we're talking about, yes, that's a possibility. Yeah.
Okay, so we have some flexibility if we.
We probably need to decide before we spend the money and we can't go back after the fact and say we're going to reallocate 4 for money we spent 8. Don't we need to know probably before when you actually come back to us? Because right now we don't have these projects let. You haven't got board approval for the actual programs, but I suspect that when you bring back, if there's a determination that you may want to use 2004 bond monies contingency for some of those projects, if they fit within the appropriate guidelines.
Yeah,
We need to know ahead of time, probably.
Yes, I agree with that statement.
Because, Jerry, I think we couldn't spend it, say it's 8, and then come back later and say, oh, we're going to use 4 instead for that, and then use 8 for something else, or could we?
No, I agree. There are limits on how far back in time you can go. You have to make under the federal tax requirements, you have to make an allocation within 18 months of when you make the expenditure.
Okay, so I think Ms. Torres brought up a very good point about making sure that we're doing the appropriate balance between 4 and 8, and then making sure we have enough money in 8 so we don't end up short on something we're trying to deal with. Okay, Mr. Guzman.
How are you going to let out the bids on these projects? Do you bundle them in terms of similar projects and go out with one large bid, or do you bid them individually, or how is it?
Because we're going to be moving so quickly, all of this work needs to be completed by the beginning of the 12-13 school year. We'll be breaking them down into packages where we can get the most competitive and the quickest reply or response to our bids. We will be bundling some of the projects that are like, and in fact, I believe that we've got those renovation projects where we have there's multiple mechanical work that goes on at Murkison middle school, for instance, that'll be bundled together as a single project, so.
Makes sense.
But there will be more than likely, I think we have 34 locations for the renovation work, and that's probably there will probably be at least 12.5 or 24 projects that will come out of that work. Some of it will be bundled, but there'll be quite a number of projects that we'll need to.
Yep. And even though I know we're going to have to move pretty quickly to the extent that we can within the allotted time and the process, obviously consider the MBE.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And we'll also be looking at breaking those down into smaller packages so that capacity will not be so much of an issue with the smaller contractors coming forward.
Can I follow up, Mr. Guzman? So when we come back, whatever quarter, maybe 2 quarters out, when the CBOC comes back and report, if they can talk about this set of packages separately from, rolling it into everything else, so we can see how well we did on this and find out if we're doing better or worse, if it becomes more challenging, but just kind of address that aspect of it. There's a hub utilization update when we get at the CBOC. So you don't have to do anything now, but just at some point, just report on this part of it separately. Okay, other questions or comments on this? Okay, thank you all very much. Greg, Jerry, thank you all for being here. I know it's tough on a Monday night, particularly with something else going on. So get out of here. Thank you.
Nicole?
Okay, board members, we have one other item on the agenda.
Mr. President, trustees, tonight we're scheduled to discuss the district's budget and fiscal planning from both a short and longer-term perspective. Beginning with the look at the 3-year budget landscape, we will talk about the fiscal forecast for fiscal year 12 through fiscal year 15. We also are going to talk about the development of the preliminary budget for next school year. As well, there are other related topics for discussion, such as the district's tax rate and possible scenarios for the consideration, is there 5? Yes. The consideration of a tax ratification election, compensation issues, and a proposed withdrawal of last year's declaration of financial exigency. In a broader context, our conversation this evening reflects our long-range budget planning, in which we're beginning the 3rd year of a 5-year budget plan. Over the last 2 years, our strategy has been to reduce the budget, stabilize our resources, and create a structure that allows us to do a better job of controlling our finances and our destiny as a district, no matter what happens at the legislature, so that we can actually agree that we are comfortable with the way we're using our resources, but most importantly, that we don't have to live in the fear of what's going to happen in the future, and we're able to plan accordingly. Now, the goal is to be the authors of our own fate by creating financial opportunities ourselves as a district. The result of 2 years of austerity planning and budget reductions is what has happened that has actually put us in a better position to plan for strategic goals that have been in our strategic plan for some time around staff compensation or funding other priorities outlined in our 5-year strategic plan. Now, I'm going to have a pretty comprehensive introduction to the budget piece, but please bear with me because I think it's going to have some of the key parts that when Nicole Conley-Abram and Michael Hauser, the CFO and the Human Capital Officers, will bring in the other details that will undergird the big picture that I'm going to lay out this evening. Now, our discussion is scheduled as part of the approved fiscal year 13 budget development calendar to provide the administration with early guidance on whether or not to include a compensation increase and/or tax increase in the preliminary budget, which is scheduled to be presented to the board in February of this year. Our CFO, Nicole Conley-Abram, has developed several scenarios and options that I think will really be rich for your board discussion. Now, my presentation is going to have a couple of parts. I'm going to talk about the budget austerity measures, on how the district is on a stable path, staff retention and pay parity, options for increasing compensation, I'm going to put forward a couple of TRE, tax ratification election scenarios, and then turn it over to Michael and Nicole to kind of take you into some of the details around the budget. For the budget austerity measures, I just wanted to remind everyone that when I became superintendent a little over 2 years ago, the district had been in an austerity planning and reduction mode. When I started the job in July 2009, there was a sense that there were operational inefficiencies that offer ways to balance the budget without a significant effect on the classroom. And the board went so far to have MGT do an efficiency study for the district, of which we've been using for some time over the last couple of years. Now, in fiscal year 2010, many central office positions were eliminated. We saved close to $700,000, and then we implemented a hiring freeze that saved the district about $1.5 million. And when we rolled into fiscal year 2011, those reductions went to another level where we eliminated 117 central office positions, which saved the district an estimated $5 million. And then we implemented a total of $27.7 million in reductions in savings over these 2 years, without touching local campuses. Now, after those first 2 years, the budget cuts and the legislature reached a point where we were starting to begin to feel things at the school and classroom level. In fiscal year 2012, as you will recall, the district eliminated 1,153 positions, and the bulk of which were at the campus level. We increased employee contributions for the same level of health coverage. We obtained some fixed pricing for fuel. We implemented a work week schedule in the summer to reduce our energy and our efficiency, and we undertook other reduction programs across the district. Now, after all of those reductions, we are at a place where the district is indeed now on a more stable path, and those out-year savings because of the reductions are allowing us to kind of free up our own space to think about shaping for the future. Now, because of the way in AISD we went about our budget reductions last year, we have a year to kind of catch our breath. That's the year we're in right now, and to adapt to the new budget reality in which we must operate. Not all school districts in Texas are in the same position, and that is pretty new to me. This is the only state I've worked in where we are not treated equally as districts across the state. So Moe, Casey and Associates, one of the leading school finance consulting firms and a firm that worked for AISD, has found that most of the school districts surveyed anticipate additional staff losses this year, the year that we're in, and for fiscal year 13. Now, if you'll recall, that's not where AISD is. In planning for our budget reductions, we looked at a future horizon of at least 2 years. Our multi-year financial planning has allowed the district to continue its practice of taking preemptive actions to address budget challenges for now and in the future. As a result, we are currently in a position where we do not have to anticipate reducing staff or making any other significant budget reductions in this year. Now, from a budget perspective, we are on a stable path for the next 18 months until the legislature returns in 2013, using a strategy that called for increased spending controls, maximizing available grants, and increasing our average daily attendance, all of which has allowed the district to increase its reserves, known as the fund balance, beyond the 14% that is required by board policy. As a reminder, however, these required reserve levels are much lower than the reserve levels that the state, the Texas Education Agency, recommends that a district maintain. According to our last published 2010 audit report, our district was $50 million short from meeting the state's optimum fund balance requirement to cover all collection deficits and to maintain at least 2 months of cash flow disbursements and dollars needed to cover any cash flow. It is for these reasons that we work to protect our reserves to ensure that they are adequate enough to cover cash flow requirements for payroll and vendor payments and to avoid any expensive borrowing costs. Now, nevertheless, last year's staff cuts were hard and have created challenges for our staff and our district. At a campus level, even with reductions, principals and staff are indeed meeting higher performance expectations as they are operating with reduced staffing levels. District staff is doing everything possible to ensure that our students don't bear the brunt of the budget cuts and feel it in their academic experience, because quite frankly, as they have shared with me and that I agree with, it is simply the right thing to do. Now, for everyone, the challenges have increased, and we are all doing more with less, but we also can do more with what we actually have in our bucket. Existing staff has seen their health care and leave benefits reduced, while salaries have been frozen for an unprecedented 2 consecutive years. And we're already poised, if we don't do something now, to repeat this for another year. Staff retention and pay parity are a key issue for discussion tonight. Retaining high-quality staff will be one of the biggest challenges we have in the coming 2 years. And it's one that we know, especially at the teacher level, where high-quality teachers indeed have the greatest impact on student achievement. When I started in the district, pay parity was already an issue. We were talking about this the day I walked in the door. Surrounding districts were paying teachers more and attracting many of our educators. Now, 2 years later, we have fallen behind even further. For most districts, salaries have been frozen for 1 year. AISD's has been frozen for 2 years. Even our local counterpart, Round Rock, gave out raises when we didn't. And we're not sure, again, where everybody's going to fall, but we don't want to keep in that pace of they're giving raises, but we're not. Our analysis indicates that AISD teaching salaries today are 3.6% behind our regional competitors like Round Rock, Eames, Pflugerville, and 11.3% behind our urban counterparts like Houston, Dallas, and others when FICA is not included. And when you compare us to our fast peer groups, this is the state comptroller, and that report is the state's new barometer on school district efficiency and performance. Teacher salaries for AISD are 9.5% behind. Now, with FICA included, we are still ranked at the bottom. With FICA included, we're still ranked at the bottom when we're compared to those fast districts and other urban districts. But locally, it does actually improve our rankings, pushing us closer to the top. But the issue with FICA and why I raise it tonight is that while these contributions are appreciated and people don't take them for granted, but they are viewed by prospective staff members as a pay cut. Coming to Austin means you simply take about 6.2% home less than what you were getting in other districts. And so it just reduces our competitiveness. Further, moving from a district to a district really affects an employee's ability to tap into Social Security. So many of our staff members don't really feel the benefit of this structure. Now, to make progress on pay parity, we need to consider moving forward with the equivalent of a 3% salary increase, either through a one-time additional payment or through an ongoing salary increase that would have to be funded by a successful tax ratification election, a TRE, that could be as early as November 2012. Now, by drawing down on our fund balance that we have worked very hard to get to the highest levels possibly ever, am I right about that, Nicole? I mean, the highest levels ever, the district could cover the cost of a 3% increase for fiscal year 13 as a transition, it's basically a bridge, but a transition to a permanent salary increase that would have to be ratified by voters. I would like to see the district make a multi-year commitment to compensation for our staff. Neutralizing the disparity in pay between AISD and surrounding districts would require additional investments beyond this in the out years. Now, there are a few ways we could go about making this commitment, and I've asked our CFO to work with me, with our labor organizations, and other key stakeholders to provide us with some of the financial impacts and risks associated with these options. And these are in your presentation tonight. She'll talk you through some pros and cons of timeline and what might be packaged in a design. But the options for actually increasing compensation is what I'll close on with tonight. Even with all we've done strategically to increase our reserves, the fund balance, it's simply not enough to cover the kind of compensation increases that are needed to address pay parity. Existing reserves would only allow the district to defray the cost of compensation increase for only 1 year. Now, as a reminder, the decision to seek a tax increase through a TRE is a relatively new development for school districts in Texas. Prior to 2006, with the passage of new state school finance legislation, school districts, like other local taxing authorities, could vote to increase property taxes within a certain range without having to seek voter approval. This is still the case for the city, the county, and other local taxing entities. School districts are the only local taxing authority in our state that are required to get voter approval for any increases in taxes. That being said, school districts throughout the state are having to grapple with the risks and the challenges related to whether or when to hold a tax ratification election. Now, for AISD, I see a couple of options that are what the administration is discussing as part of our commitment to bring forward to you a multi-year compensation strategy that will drive our financial planning as much as our academics do, so we can kind of map out the next 3 years. We can't do this alone. We are a business of people, and we need quality people who want to stay in our district and feel like they're being fairly compensated. So here are the 3 designs that I'm just verbally walking you through, and nothing's in stone, but just to give you a sense of what we've been talking about, I've tried to capture them so that you can kind of put them in the back of your mind as you listen to the presentation from my colleagues. Option 1 works like this. Include in the preliminary fiscal year 13 budget a one-time payment that is the equivalent to a 3% salary increase for all full-time and part-time employees. A permanent compensation increase would be contingent on a successful tax ratification election. If the TRE was not successful, then the cost of the first year of the compensation increase would simply be covered by drawing down the district's fund balance, and the salary increase would not be permanent. For this option, it is recommended that a TRE be considered for November 2012. Now, option 2, if you did a TRE and called it for June or November of 2013, the same scenario that I just described in option 1 could occur for fiscal year 13. That is, with a one-time equivalent of a 3% salary increase provided and paid with fund balance. Here's the difference. In addition, the preliminary fiscal year 14 budget would also include a one-time payment that is equivalent to a 3% salary increase for all full and part-time employees. A permanent compensation increase would therefore be contingent on a successful TRE. This option allows for a 2-year bridge to seek a permanent solution, perhaps giving us a little more time to work this through with the community and other stakeholders. The second one-time payment would require another drawdown from fund balance to cover the cost of the second one-time compensation increase. This would be the last one-time payment we could even consider trying to draw down on the fund balance. If the TRE was not successful, to be perfectly clear, This means that salaries would remain at fiscal year 10 salary levels. We could not carry this on. Now, option 3 is that we can prepare a fiscal year 13 preliminary budget without contemplation of a compensation increase, thereby not making any kind of commitment at this time. Now, any approach that we talk about is going to involve some degree of risk, which is one of the reasons why it's important that the board address the issue this evening and provide your feedback and any direction to help us start shaping that preliminary budget. But I want to be absolutely clear about this point so we don't find ourselves on the back end asking questions about what the intent of the administration's conversation tonight was about. If the board directs the administration to include a compensation increase for fiscal year 13 in this preliminary budget, this is the signal to the administration and the public that the district is going to be calling a tax ratification election somewhere between as early as November 2012 and perhaps as late as November 2013. But either way, this is where we're getting the direction that when we do this, it means that we're making a commitment to a multi-year strategy that's going to get us there. Those commitments just go hand in hand. And without one, we really can't proceed without the other. So these broad discussions and details can be changed over the next several months to whatever the board wants to do. But I want to be clear that what we are proposing is that by doing anything, even if it's the one-time payment, that this is the signal that we're starting to move forward. So it's not a if we're going to have a TRE, it's a when. And I need the board to give me your guidance on when you think it would be best to have that happen. Now, as part of tonight's budget forecast, Nicole Conley-Abram will provide the information you need to weigh the risks and the benefits of these issues and to provide the administration with direction as we begin to prepare the preliminary budget for the next year. And as we look ahead to the remaining years, to the remaining 3 years of our 5-year budget framework, this last lift is what we really would need to do to be on time within the strategic plan to address compensation like we had mapped out when we approved it in 2009. I also just want to say that based on the conversation tonight, I will take your comments, your feedback, your questions, and in the next Board Weekly Update, I will reshape or readjust anything that I've said and then put it in writing so that you at least have what I've talked about verbally, at your disposal as we continue to have budget discussions over the next several weeks. Now, I'll turn it over to Nicole Conley-Abram, who will take it from here and walk you through the PowerPoint, which has been posted for public consideration, and there are other support documents that Michael Hauser will talk you through at key points in the presentation. Nicole Conley-Abram.
Thank you. Good evening, Board President, trustee members, superintendent, staff, public. I'm Nicole Conley-Abram, CFO for Austin ISD. I'm joined by Chief Human Capital Officer, Mr. Michael Hauser, my co-pilot in a lot of these deliberations. So tonight we're going to have a discussion on the fiscal forecast, which we've prepared for the board to consider. It's sort of the first step in sort of deliberating and setting sort of the levels for developing the FY 2013 budget. We also included possible scenarios and options for consideration of a tax ratification election, and also the consideration of the withdrawal for financial exigency. So just to kind of give you an overview of the discussion that I wanted to sort of talk you through tonight and sort of provide you with some high-level assessments of the analysis that you have in your binders, we want to look at some of the multi-year planning and strategy around 13. I want to update you on sort of the financial condition as it relates to the data that we have today to really provide you with what we project as sort of that same services budget, which is basically that baseline budget or the forecast, and also provide you with the various scenarios and the cost implications and the options for considering the pros and cons for considering tax ratification, election, and the timing and how that all would shape out over the next 5 years. So the board approved the board priorities for 12-13 at the November retreat, and I appreciate your deliverance in that. It allows us to start building our preliminary budget and ensure that we're aligned with the expectations of the board. Just to kind of, I want to remind the board and the public about some of the major building blocks of the preliminary budget. You know, just first off, we sort of start with that baseline assessment, and that's what we call sort of the same services budget. And that's basically providing what the financial condition would be if we had to provide the same level of services that we're currently providing today. And so when you hear me talk about throughout the process about the baseline deficit or surplus, that refers to that baseline assessment where we're sort of diagnosing where we're at today. And then we sort of look at adding on sort of new needs on top of that baseline. That way where we talk about adding the expenditure assumptions behind the AAFRs, any additional new needs to meet any of our strategic plan priorities, and how that would impact or add additional pressure to that baseline assumption. And then obviously the last component is once we sort of adopt the budget, we continue to review and assess and report out monthly. I'm also trying to internally build capacity to develop quarterly forecasts so that we can sort of have some analytical understanding of where we will be by year end and sort of project those out and routinize that kind of analysis, which currently is not in place today. So the board has shown some good financial stewardship and management and leadership in sort of requiring sort of the multi-year planning. Each year, our board parameters require us to look at a multi-year forecast. We've come to some conclusions about the kind of actions that we want to implement over a number of years to realize various expenditure relief and or savings. It's considered a best practice. You know, it allows you to sort of look at trends and really plan for these trends on multiple years. It builds sort of case for things that we need lead times. We saw some of this when we looked at sort of our health plan. We knew we were going to phase it in the first year and sort of switch over and then implement some plan changes in the second year. It allows you to look at sort of your infrastructure to really see about those kind of items that may or may not need additional time and consideration. It also allows us to do what we're doing today. When we have a financial condition, what options do we have to really look at some of the more, the affordability of some of those commitments in the out years and plan accordingly. So I'm happy to see that we have a strong multi-year plan. Our rating agencies recognize that, and it's resulted in our current rating of a AAA, which we assumed in 2010. And so a lot of what I talk about tonight is sort of looking at the cornerstone of where we were when we received our AAA rating, which was a unreserved fund balance of about $148.1 million. So that's sort of our, that's what I consider where we want to be from this point on out. As Dr. Christopherson already spoke about, we started our fiscal planning in the beginning of the FY 2011 budget, and we had a multi-year strategy to ensure that we had a plan to stabilize the district in FY 13. So we've been building up our reserves. We've been implementing cost controls. We've been doing things like implementing cutoff timelines for purchasing. We've been obtaining voluntary price reductions for contract, maximizing grant opportunities, one-time grant opportunities, and we've really changed our spending culture here in AISD. I've been working sort of directly with our administrators and budget managers, and we've sort of eliminated the sort of use it or lose it mentality, and we're at a very conscious understanding about where we are with spending. And so I'm really happy with the culture that we've been able to build as a result of our unfortunate financial condition. So just to kind of give you some summaries of the financial analysis that you have in your packet, currently based upon the data that we have today, which has already changed, we've got new appraisal values from our Travis County, which are much more favorable for us, or slightly more favorable. We are projecting about a $12.6 million baseline budget for FY13. And it's based upon, we've went back, we've looked at our current projections for not only the tax base, but how we look as a student population. We have some aggressive growth within our special ed populations, our comp ed. We've also changed, the board took action in the budget assumptions and changed that collection rate. It increased it to based on actual. Our collection rates were actually higher. We had planned on more conservative collection rates. And all of this has resulted in sort of a deficit that is sort of less than what we initially projected when we adopted the budget in August. And so our spending levels have sort of subsided as a result. We're seeing some, where we were escalating on average about a 7% a year, we're sort of brought that down. And so we really, so we're trending out from an expenditure-wise, we're sort of bringing that down quite substantially. So as a result, we've been able to sort of maximize these one-time opportunities and aggressively build up our reserves so that we are in a better position to not only stabilize 13, assuming that we wanted to sort of hold the line on staffing, but we're also at a place where we may be able to consider utilizing a fund balance as a short-term bridge to address some compensation issues until we decide that we want to call for a tax ratification election. So as Dr. Christarfin already spoke, salary levels have been frozen for 2 years. I'm part of a working group of capital area CFOs, and they're all looking, they've been frozen for 1 year, we've been frozen for 2 years, and they're already looking as to how do they find capacity to do an increase for next year. No one wants to sort of stay in the same place even for 1 year. So I do have I do understand that many districts are struggling to try to find some kind of opportunities to increase for next year since they've been frozen for 1 year. And so I'm going to let Mr. Hauser talk a little bit about what's in your packets on page 11 through, is it 14 on the pay disparity that Dr. Christarfin spoke about. They went through and done some analysis, and he can talk a little bit about where we're at in terms of our salary levels that have been frozen since FY 2010.
Very good. Thank
And
you.
you mean the pages, but it's page 11, not PowerPoint slide 11.
Right, it's
Go to
page 11
Page
in your
11, which
binder.
is a black and white thing that looks like this.
Right. In the binder,
Yeah.
you'll find pages 11 through 13, actually are the ones that I'll refer to with you this evening, and I look forward to doing that. Yes, in our package, it's before the presentation materials. As part of the human capital strategy, you know that compensation is one component that's extremely important for us. And if you look in that notebook, hopefully you will find on page 11, under tab 5, found it? All righty, Mr. Torres. We have done a comparison of several different ways to look at our salaries with our school teachers to see if we are losing gain, being competitive, or where exactly do we stand. And one of the first places that I can point out to you on page 11, as we've talked about before, are the FAST districts. The Financial Allocation Study of Texas is identifying some 21 school districts now that are being looked at from a state perspective for a variety of financial issues. On page 11, what we wanted to do for you, because there are actually 3 districts that do not use steps and lanes, Aldine, Northeast, and Plano. But what we can show you is with the 18 that do use a similar salary structure to us, you will find with FICA and without FICA, with a very quick glance, where we find ourselves at this particular point. Without FICA, you will find we are running 18th. With FICA, we are running 15th in this particular area. And as has been explained prior, that it's about a 9.5% shortfall. If we wanted to be number 1, without FICA, it would be about, or with FICA, then it would be a 5.4% increase. So you can see from a state perspective. I wanted to show you pages 12 and 13 as well this evening, though, because this is the area that we've talked about for the last several years, and it sort of pinpoints even more effectively for us, maybe as well as the FAST school districts. But on page 12,
as I brought to you in years past, we've taken a look at what we consider to be comparable urban school districts versus AISD. And if you will take a look on page 12, you will see that a lot of the school districts are the same, of the fast variety, but this pinpointed more of our competition as far as our district is concerned. So on page 12, you will notice that with no FICA involved, and you can see the charts again highlight down at the bottom, Austin ISD without FICA in reference to urban school districts. And this is looking at all the different ranges in our salary schedules. If you add FICA, even at this level, on page 12 against other urban school districts, you will find that we do move up just a little bit, but not a great deal. So you see what the landscape is looking like. With 2 years of frozen salaries, we have just continually dropped backwards. The salary schedule that I always will look at in comparison to what we really need to consider, I think, more seriously than others, is right here in our own backyard. So on page 13, you will see what we consider our local school districts or our local competition. This is really when we lose teachers that the majority of the teachers will move toward. And you can see the ranking up at the top. You're going to see Leander, Lake Travis, Round Rock, Eanes, Pflugerville, Maynard, Georgetown, Del Valle, Austin, and Hayes. When we do lose teachers, teachers have a tendency to move to these schools for some very simple reasons. They are located conveniently to our school district. It's not much of a move, and in some cases, it doesn't even mean moving from your own home. The other issue then is FICA. A lot of our teachers now are finding that 6.2% is no longer a distinct advantage and a reason to stay in a school district. The carrot of a second retirement when you're 35, 40 years old has sort of lost its glamour at this particular point, and we're finding that as teachers begin to move on, the issue of FICA doesn't seem to have the hitting power or the drawing power that it once had. So please notice, I'm trying to put us into a perspective of what we deal with right up against the river, right with our neighborhoods that are working through school districts with us. If you will see, you can check and see that the 5-year status, I take you from 07 all the way up through 11-12. But I wanted to draw your attention to the FICA category as well. When you do add FICA, you will find that we begin to and do move to the top in most cases. But I can tell you here again, if you're looking at moving teachers and motivating teachers to stay in our district, the current population of our teachers, FICA has no longer become an interest. And while it's a 6.2% advantage as far as building a retirement program, 6.2% is also matched by the teacher themselves. So there is a deduction on a person's salary schedule to keep up in this particular role of 2 retirements. The 6.2 has become a huge issue. I think what we need to do is create a target for movement, and what I'd like to think as a target for movement is staying right within our own competitive area, and that would mean then looking at the issue competitively right in our own neighborhoods. And I'd like for us, if we could, to consider the idea that FICA is not the appeal that it once was. And in order for us to move, as we've talked about prior this evening, really we're looking at about a 3.6% deficit if you wanted to move up to the very top of the local school districts. And I would think that we in Austin ISD should consider moving at least into the top third. So what I'd like to lay out for you this evening is that really we're lagging about 3%, 3.5% at this particular point to get into the top third of the local school districts. The unfortunate thing is they too are having these conversations as we speak, and you're going to find that they will be making movement on their salary schedules for the 12-13 school year. So it is incumbent upon us, if we're really going to move the system, to look at this than more than just a one-year fix. And we need to do back-to-back process to move this system to really become competitive again, at least in the top third. And I hope that you will find that helpful as far as looking at the schedules.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And so just picking up where we left off on slide 9, just looking at some of the possible concerns or considerations with regards to utilizing your fund balance in a way to sort of, in some of the options that Dr. Christopherson presented earlier. Obviously, the current forecast and analysis would need to be updated. It assumes no programmatic increases, so we would need to build this forecast and include all of the expenditures that we're projecting for AAFRs, as well as any other preliminary budget increases that the administration expects to present. We did incorporate some natural costs for escalating factors like health, fuel, and electricity, but beyond those baseline costs, we would need to adjust our estimates to include those new programmatic expenditures. To avoid a downgrade from the rating agencies, we would need a multi-year financial plan that stabilizes the district's budget in the out years. So they understand that, you know, your reserves, if we have an aggressive strategy to build them up and we want to use them for one-time options to address compensation and or possible mitigate state cuts, but they want us to have a plan that basically ensures that our recurring revenues that are associated with that recurring expenditure is in line at some point in time, and we would need a multi-year plan around that. And then the last piece is, which is why we're continuing to kind of aggressively continue what we've already done in terms of building up our reserves and taking advantage of one-time revenue as they become available, is obviously planning for the next legislative session. So we know that we need to go above and beyond where we are today, even more so if we want to put ourselves in a position where we can absorb some of the cuts that we could possibly experience at the next legislative session. So again, for out-year planning, we know that in developing the 13-year budget and associated 3-year fiscal plan, we need to sort of take into account that we not only would have to sort of replenish what we take out, but we also have to stabilize ourselves in the out years and consider the fact that we don't want to go beyond that $148 million unreserved, which got us the AAA to begin with, and then we probably have to do some make some progress against possible mitigation of state cuts. We also know that our reliance on reserves will require us to find a solution that is going to be recurring at some point from the revenue side. We are working this year to look at to take advantage of not only one-time monies that are afforded by the Edge of Jobs Fund. You know, we got some additional monies in. The district hadn't had an audit of its tax base since 2006, so I ordered the tax base audit from the comptroller, and that's going to result in some favorable adjustments within our TEA. So we're working to sort of maximize opportunities for us to realize some revenue so that we can include it and sort of keep it in our reserves in anticipation that we're going to probably need to access more of our reserves in the out years as we have more pressure from the state. But we also know that we have limited options available to us on the expenditure side. Many of these we've already taken advantage of some of the opportunities in both the efficiency and the TASB sort of right-sizing review with regards to staffing. And we all know that sort of balanced approaches work best. I mean, we can't just necessarily cut our way out of a solution that even deals with the state, possible state cuts. We know that we need to look at a revenue solution that's recurring, and so it really has to be a balanced approach at this point in time. And outside of obviously, it's a matter of when we want to sort of move forward with a possible TRE if we are going to consider a salary increase that we want to make permanent for our employees. So just to talk a little bit about the compensation options. By nature, you know, compensation it sort of is defined by sort of usually a baseline salary increase that is recurring by nature. And I think that Dr. Kerstarfman has already talked to you about our possible option for the board to consider is to consider a one-time additional payment that we would not necessarily increase the salary schedule for, but we would make that one-time payment so employees could feel the benefit or the equivalent of a salary increase, but it wouldn't be baseline unless it was contingent upon a successful TRE. But the board has many options in what that compensation options are in terms of whether or not they want to apply different percentages by employee groups. The option that the superintendent presented is an across-the-board 3%. And so I presented some options for you in front of you that you could also look to consider as well. On the tax ratification election, I've just some overall comments about a possibility of a TRE. It's still, you know, as part of the Dr. Karstafen's opening comments, there's just still a tough financial climate. The TRE statewide, the results have been kind of tepid. You know, we had about 69% of TREs approved this last November 2011 elections, and 57% of bond elections sort of approved. So it's still sort of tepid. We're still growing with regards to our national, local economy. It's getting stronger. There is growth, and the growth has been picked up in more recently. But we still have some, obviously, some potential challenges in that regard. And taxpayer groups, there's wide disparity about who supports a TRE and who not. I can't, you know, every time we have this discussion, I get, you know, phone calls and inquiries from various stakeholders about where they are with regards to supporting or not supporting a TRE. So it's very difficult and challenging to call. And obviously, you know, what is tied to the TRE, the rate in the taxpayer burden around, or taxpayer fatigue around other taxing jurisdictions as they go up every year annually. We know the city and the county go up every year. So that is something that you always have to sort of consider in terms of actual taxpayer burden. And so, again, also lastly, outside of sort of whether or not you gauging taxpayer acceptance for a TRE, but timing is everything. If we do a TRE, certainly it would affect our timeline for a possible bond election timing when you consider the impact of the TRE, the bond, as well as the other taxing jurisdictions. Just quickly, the next slide, slide 15, sort of shows you what we keep in terms of revenue with regards to the additional pennies that are available. Going for the full 9 cents available to us, estimated we would probably keep around $35 million or so. That would add to our recurring revenue stream. At this point in time, considering what we're, what's on the table with regards to the 3% and looking at our baseline deficit projected for FY13, if we were to consider a TRE, I would suggest that the minimum considered be 6 cents. So you're looking at possibility of a TRE of 6 cents and above if you wanted to do something to address the compensation and make some progress on our operating deficit. And then, so lastly, I want to talk about some of, well, second to the last, some pros and cons of a TRE based upon fiscal year. Again, I've talked about some going out for a possible November 2012 election. Obviously, it would allow the district to stabilize its finances earlier. We would know, and we would have an automatic contingency if the TRE failed. We know we would have another year to possibly go out to voters, and we would have our fund balance that would allow us to address some of our operational and our compensation needs. Obviously, the economy as a con, the economy is still sluggish, but growth is apparent. But there's been sort of tepid, results with regards to a TRE. Postponing a TRE for either a June or a November 2013. Again, there's some pros. It could sort of, again, give us some time for the economy to rebuild and make the case with the public. Also falls in lines with the next legislative session, which, if cuts are worse, it provides compelling rationale as to why a TRE would be necessary to allow us to maintain operating levels. It's riskier to delay, right? Because that would mean that you would be reliant upon your fund balance for another year, that you would be drawing down if it doesn't fail. And it would impact on your timing for the bond election, which I think that you all have had some early discussions about a possible May 2013, which I think that's something that the committee will need to consider as we sort of talk about these possible options and whether or not there's a necessity behind that timeline. And then obviously pushing it out again, it really makes the whole affordability of it brings to question the affordability at all of a compensation increase. Obviously, you would be reverting back to 2010 levels and waiting to go out in November 2014, which obviously would probably be better for the economy. But it means that we would be in some very challenging financial conditions for the next few years that we would be trying to manage without any additional revenue. And then always as an option, I'm just putting on the table, we always have that sort of one-time magic around sort of changing the fiscal year, just that I want to remind the board and the public of, and we would need some advance time to put that into place if the board ever wanted to utilize that option. And so lastly, I just want to, we will, and this says December because the analysis was prepared in December, but we're continually working on our revenue estimates and assumptions. We're looking at our reviews for our health plan costs. We're working with our consultants to see if we can make some plan changes. We're also putting together some possible mitigation strategies as it relates to sort of developing more preventive options and wellness care for the out years. We'll also continue to discuss and vet the budget request for FY13 and those strategic funding needs. And we're going to continue to build our reserves. I do think that, we're going to continue with our controls. We still have our freeze in place. We're going to look at our cutoff timelines to see so that we can continue to add and sort of possibly plan for possible not only consideration of the compensation, but any other future cuts that we could anticipate from the state. And that concludes the formal presentation. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. A very complicated stew here of all of the budget stuff. And then as you sort of alluded to when you talked about your priorities and the initiatives and the investments we need to make sure that our kids are meeting the needs, but then recognizing we have state budget cuts potentially coming our way based on the indications we got last legislative session. But then the human capital, the integration of the TRE, and other things that we need to spend money on. So Dr. Stockman, you indicated about the board giving direction, but I think tonight this is our first discussion, so I don't know that I'm anticipating the board giving direction tonight with that coming out of this meeting where the board is at this point versus feedback, and then we can discuss it further going forward. We'll see where it shakes out.
No, I mean, fair enough, but the thing that y'all do where you talk and you share your different perspectives so we have a sense of where different people are and what their questions are so we can prepare those as we lead into the preliminary budget.
I think that's fine. I just want to make sure we're probably not an expectation that we're going to walk away with direction tonight, because I think there's probably going to be some questions that may take some time to answer, and we'll make sure this is all important, and we need to make sure we're thoughtful about it. Okay, let's open for comments or questions. Mr. Guzman.
Just to clarify on your comment, that, I mean, what about discussing the interest in a TRE?
Yep, I think everything's fair game. I'm just trying to make sure we set expectations. I'm not sure we'll walk away tonight with all of the different comments that people are going to have that she'll have direction. So I think we want to ask whatever we want to ask, comment on whatever you want to comment on, and then we'll kind of put it all together and then have another discussion to kind of figure out where the board shakes out on this. Dr. Steffen.
The stars were to align and you're all kind of in agreement or could
Sure.
indicate that would help us a lot, or if you're not, just those kinds of things.
Since my mic is on,
Go, man.
I would I would weigh in from the standpoint of in favor of a TRE, no doubt multi-year budget, and I'd rather see it sooner than later, and my preference would be November 2012 at this time, unless some other things fall out from that standpoint. I think also in terms of the pros and cons, election year next year, depending on how the election goes, it could get negative depending on who comes into office, from the standpoint of being able to provide or move forward TREs or bond elections for that matter, because depending on who comes into office, if the people that do not prefer or against any kind of tax increases for whatever reason come into power, then obviously the mood of the country and therefore maybe would fall back also on the state and local communities. So that's kind of my preference at this time in brief.
Torres.
Mr. Guzman, let me just play that out. Assuming the folks that you suggested would come into play, wouldn't they also perhaps vote down a TRE because they would be voting against taxes if that prevailed? In other words, if the percentage of those folks prevailed, then wouldn't they also prevail in the election? Or are you assuming we would be an outlier in this area?
Well, they wouldn't be in place. By the time we voted on our TRE, they wouldn't be in place yet, even though they won the election, for that matter.
Okay.
Asking is if the voter sentiment, to vote those people into office, would their same voter sentiment be less likely to support a TRE if they're willing to put that type of constituent?
Well, I'm talking about,
That's
yeah,
what you're-
possibly, but not necessarily.
Okay. Mr. Hauser, you were going to give some numbers, and and I'm not so sure you stated it, and I just want to make sure I know what the number was. You said for us to move up to number one in the local tax tables, 3.6% is what we would need.
Yes, sir.
But to move up into the top third,
3%, somewhere in that area, yes, sir. 3.6 will take you to the top, 3% would get you into the top third. The only problem, Mr. Torres, is that, as we've all discovered in this business, is that the target never stops. And as soon as we shoot the arrow, then they're loading up and shooting their arrow next.
Sure.
But 3% would get us in the top 3 school districts within our local competitive market.
and following along the lines with Mr. Guzman, if we had a TRE in November 2012, that TRE would be effective for September 2012. So we wouldn't, quote unquote, wouldn't necessarily have to dip into the fund balance if that TRE were successful.
Correct.
Okay. And then I guess I'm, Dr. Osarman, first of all, in terms of the percentages, I'm of the opinion that whatever we do for all of the employees. In other words, if it's 3%, it's 3% for everyone. If it's 3.5 or 3.6, it's 3.6 for everyone, because I think everyone has suffered, and I realize we have differences in pay, but I also think we also have the entire district has been helping us to get to where we are, and I would support that we do whatever we do equally once that number is agreed upon. I would support about a 3 or 3.5% merit or salary increase for the employees, going along the lines of what Mr. Hauser is saying about a 3.5, so that we gain a little bit of ground beyond what others might be doing. And I'm tempted to go with the November 2012, not necessarily for the same reasons that Mr. Guzman is suggesting, but because if we were successful, it would become effective September, and we wouldn't have to dip into our fund balance, and that would continue to buy us more breathing room and build up the fund balance. It also would give us breathing room from the standpoint that we're not sure what the next legislative group's going to do, and we won't know that for a whole year. And if they come back and cause us more harm, then we would have that money in the bank to help us address, at least for 1 year, how we might deal with any radical changes that they may inflict upon us. So I'm somewhat leaning towards November 2012 for a slightly different reason than Mr. Guzman. But I think I would want to see it sooner rather than later, so we don't have to dip into fund balance, and that it gives us an opportunity to save some money in the bank that otherwise we'd have to spend, and then not have it available to us if we needed it. Is it?
Ms. Moya.
Thank you. I think that we've had a salary freeze for too long. And so 2 years to me is long enough. And so I too, feel that in November 2012 would be the most appropriate time to go to the voters for a tax ratification election. But the percentages, for me, I think I'm looking at maybe something slightly higher than what we're talking about here, because I think that because, Michael, of the things you said about the districts around us are going to do a bump, then I'd like for us to be able to keep going, to keep us in the top third. It's going to require a little bit more than 3.5% salary increase. And so I'd like for us to look at what that would be as far as cent-wise. I don't know if that's a 6 cent, or what that is as far as the TRE goes. I know we have it on here. I'm just not looking at the information right now. And so I think, and I do like the idea of being able to hold on to some of the fund balance in order to use it or redeploy it somewhere else where we may find the need to do that, depending on what happens in the next legislative session. I don't have a good feel today on what kind of mood is going on over there and what kind of things may be coming down the pike, but given the numbers of education friendly legislators that are not coming back next time, leads me to believe that it may not be as much fun, certainly as it was last time. So I say that facetiously. So anyway, I do believe that it's time to go to the voters. I don't know if we're also talking about adding a bond at the same time. I'm not sure where we are with that as far as timing goes, because we do have quite a few projects that need to be undertaken, not the least of which is bringing all of our athletic facilities on campus and our big, district facilities up to, a more livable state than they are right now. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm happy to provide feedback tonight, which is sooner rather than later, and yes, November 12th on a TRE. We've articulated some of the things that the staff have been, to your point, have done over the past few years to get us where we are. They have taken a cut and leave, moved to one-year contracts, contributing to their health insurance, which means essentially a pay cut, essentially, and had the pay freeze, and as Dr. Kostarfin said, being asked to do more with fewer people on campus. Definitely time for a compensation increase to address that. And I actually wanted to start out by saying thank you for this presentation. It is comprehensive in just the way that I need to be able to understand, and I bet some of my board colleagues feel that way as well. A great snapshot of the out-year budgets, good pros and cons, and good risk and reward conversation to start us off. So leaves me with some questions, but definitely a very comprehensive snapshot overview, and I do have a comment to add. One thing I think might be missing. For everything that's here, I'd like to add to the conversation, if we're going to have another conversation about this, the long-term plan, or what is going to be our strategy, because we're going to run out of pennies before our surrounding competitive districts do. So what are we going to do about that? If we were to max out now or later or some point in the future, what are we going to do in terms of compensation to stay competitive when we run out of pennies? Of course, with the surrounding districts. I'm curious about how TIF grant fits into this conversation, long-term and support for the TIF grant, or just strategic comp. And I had a question about the difference between options 1 and 2, but I think I understand that based on your question and timing. And just finally, in terms of employee retention, attracting and keeping really good employees, I don't know who could argue with the fact that being compensated at a fair level certainly helps with that. In terms of educator quality and keeping great campuses going, definitely a need here. And my final question, we don't have to talk about it tonight, but in the future is, Nicole, you said you hear from various stakeholders when these things, sort of hit the radar and people feel like it's more serious. I'd like to hear from you guys, if you're hearing that, because I certainly hear it, but certain folks talk to me about certain things. What's the temperature of people, the typical stakeholders, for a TRE sooner rather than later, and what kind of feedback are you hearing?
Mr. President, trustee of the board, trustee Barksdale, we don't know the answer to that without, without actually, it's kind of one of those things, like once we get some signal that it's okay to start doing all that investigation, typically what happens is that some of your partners and the advocates for supporting it will fund surveys and some polling. We've done that before in AISD. At least very early in my tenure, I remember one such poll. So we would do things like that before we would make the final recommendation. But just know, so that you don't want to do that before you have a chance to know what the interest of the of your governing board is. So, but we can do all those things and collect that kind of information as we try to build an informative and comprehensive case for whether the administration would recommend this for the board.
Okay, I appreciate that. And with anything that happens in the future, as we gain feedback on this, I think we have a great opportunity now, based on, things that have gone over the past year and a half with the district going through the financial challenges that it has, to hear if someone isn't supportive, if it is the will of the board to move forward with the TRE, and as it is my will, and we hear feedback from folks who aren't necessarily supportive, can we listen very carefully to what that feedback is and figure out how we can get them to be a partner with the district and move forward with us and not work against us? And I'm happy to help with that.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Brister?
If you're just looking for the pulse of the board, I think that the timing is, we're getting to that point where we need to consider the TRE. The last time this came up, I was not in favor of it, because one of the things that I'd heard was that the perception was that we had not done enough in terms of budget cutting and finding the different types of efficiencies. Well, I think we're there now, and there's nothing else that we can do, I don't think, and I don't believe, without a TRE. 11, and I can consider either 11, 12, November of this year or next spring. And I liked what Mr. Torres said about it needs to be across the board, everybody. I don't really care for that split because everybody's been here, but I'm not going to beat that dead horse. But, up to 3.5%, where I would like to see more done, I just don't think that timing is right yet. I think we need, like you're already planning, we're going to start planning these increases in the future. So I think that's about it. So,
Ms. Lavoy?
It's nice to follow Ms. Brister because I agree with so many things that she said. Now's the time for an increase. I think we've waited long enough, and it would be an error, I think, for us not to go ahead and grant an increase. I appreciate the increase for all employees because I think it's very, very well deserved. The one piece of information I'd like to see added to this packet is information on the historical growth of the fund balance. Where does the fund balance sit right now? Do you have a current figure?
Yes. I'm sorry, it's in your packets, in the fiscal forecast. We're projecting at the end of this fiscal year. Now, we're still going through the audit, the year-end close.
Nicole, do you have the page number?
I'm sorry, it's
7.
page 7. So if you look at 1011 unaudited, the unreserved, unassigned, we're looking at 179.8.
At present. I think
By the time we close this fiscal year.
All right. I think that it would be useful to see the historical on the fund balance and the projected on the fund balance. And I understand you might want to give us 3 projections on the fund balance with different scenarios, because that could make a difference in helping us do a little bit of contingency planning around whether we succeed or don't succeed with the TRE. I think that could also help us determine the time frame for the TRE. I have to admit, one thing that concerns me is how we time a TRE and a bond. I think we have to be careful. And I think, at least speaking for myself, we'd need a little bit more info than we have on the table tonight to really give good, hard feedback on that. But I think if we looked at the fund balance and got a sense of what our protection is there, that would really, really help us in terms of picking a date. And then I guess I have some preference for the TRE and then letting the bond follow that, given the discussion that we had earlier tonight on use of the bond contingency. It just seems to me that the TRE is more compelling, and maybe then a decision on the timing of the bond can come at another time. Thank you.
I forgot to ask one question when we were talking about the 3.5% increase and how that will impact the hourly employees. How does that work?
Ms. Moy, what we are looking at right now, it would be a 3% increase. For a one-time, it would be per employee. When you build it into the base salary, our practice in the last several years is to use the midpoint, so that everybody who's lower on that hourly rate would move up. Those that are higher would still move up, but not as great a value. So what we have found to be the most fair practice with base salaries being built in is to utilize a midpoint implementation. So we would find, for this, what we're proposing right now, just so we take a very safe first step forward, would be a 3% one-time payment, and that would be premised on the individual's salary. If it becomes a base salary, then we would want our ranges to be more competitive, and we would use a midpoint to keep us into a competitive environment with as much as that 3% as we possibly could. Just so the board would know, too, one of the things that we were thinking that for school year 12-13, this one additional payment, this one payment that we would provide at a full 3%, in our deliberations, we think it would be a good time to pay it sometime about the second week in January as a separate payment, and it would be sent to the employee with a letter indicating that we're working, moving forward, trying to make this a permanent fixture. But it would give, I think all of us have experienced in this district, it's a long way from the December pay period to the January pay period. And that little bump mid-year, right in between those two timeframes, would probably be extremely noticed and extremely well received, because you could really see that one piece. Now, the best thing to do as soon as we can is make it a permanent fixture so it becomes base salary. But at least to move us forward, we could go through that process.
Michael, just clarification. Are you talking about January 13? Are you talking about?
Yeah, that's not this year. And this would be in January, January 13.
So that would be necessary if for some reason you chose not to have the election on November 12th. Because if you actually had the election and were passed, then they would know that it would be actually retroactive to September, and we may not need the January 13
And
one time.
if we were to go out in 12, that is correct.
And it was
We could just do retro from day one. One of the things that we were looking at was a fallback position. If it doesn't pass, what could you do? Well, you could then you'd shift gears and you could do a one-time payment.
Right.
I guess what's music to my ears this evening is hearing that you're talking about a 2012, and that would give us the ability to have financial stability, which is probably the best thing to consider. But we were looking at 2012, 2013, and how we could at least bridge that time.
Okay, good. Other comments or questions on this question? Okay, I give you my own individual input, which is I think when we, not trying to make this too broad, when we talk about human capital, when we talk about the framework of salary and benefits and working conditions and professional development, we got to work on all of them, right? I mean, we can bump pay up a little bit, but we still have to make sure that the climate, the supports, the working conditions for our people is better than it is today, probably. I mean, we got to continue to make that better. So on this issue, I'm also supportive, but I think for me, I'm going to go to Ms. Barksdale. The comments that she made, I think, are actually very compelling about all the reasons why. But I think when we talk about salary freezes because we froze for 2 years, I can say from some folks that's not a compelling thing, because they're going to say, well, my salary's been froze for 3 years, or my salary's been froze for 4 years. The issue is we froze salaries at a below market level. Our people are actually being paid less, and I think the salary comparison data shows that. It'd be one thing if they were froze at a competitive market-based salary. They're not. And then we can talk about FICA and all the values of that, but we know that our workforce probably doesn't place a lot of value on that. I do think we have to think about what's the right mix of fund balance and tax increase, particularly given the level of our fund balance, and also all the other things that we want to make investments in. I mean, this compensation can't be the only thing we're doing, because we know we have so many other challenges to basically at least pick one, the portfolio of options that we're trying to provide to make sure that our kids are prepared with college-ready culture and the SEL, and we're getting some grant money, but there's a lot of other things we need to do. So I think, at least for me, I support moving forward with this, but I'm not sure exactly what the right mix is. And this becomes part of the story, that when you go out, if you're going to do a tax increase, what is it you're going out for? And I think we have a lot of work to do to explain where we are, because what we didn't talk about tonight is the impact of recapture. And even though we showed it in the statistics, I mean, that is going to be a very challenging thing to say we're going to ask for $1 and we're going to keep 59 cents. And I'm a little, on your chart, I think there's a stat question. I'm just not sure with the percentage in the last one is actually higher, and I'm not sure why it'd be any different for 1 cent versus 6 cents or 9 cents, but I think that issue is going to be huge. I think this implication of Social Security, we talk about FICA like we know what it is, but I think a lot of people in the public may or may not understand that. One thing that's a little confusing to me is target revenue. When you look at the comparison of us versus other districts, and yet knowing where our target revenue is relative to some of these other districts, why our pay is so much lower than our target revenue would otherwise indicate. Part of that's Social Security, part of that's other factors. That if there are organized opponents, we need to be able to be prepared to talk about why that is. You know, do we have, because it's a price volume issue, right? If we all have target revenue and our target revenue is actually higher, you got to take the effect of Social Security out, and then we're still paid less. That means we either have to have we got lower price, we have more volume. Why is that? And how does that translate to performance or academic strategy or whatever? So I think we have a lot of work to do to deal with the story about why this makes sense. We got to deal with the timing of what the implications are for the bond, as other people have already alluded to, the bond election. And I think Ms. Parks also talked about sort of the tax rate war we're going to get into, because when you think about our target revenue, we're also at $1.79. I think almost every other Central Texas district's at $1.04, or even maybe somewhere less. So they have 13 cents to go, we have 9.1. So we can start the price war, but we're not going to be able to end it. And I know that may be shorter term or longer term, but we need to be able to understand how we're going to get there. And again, that goes back to the story of explaining why do we have so much lower pay if our target revenue is actually higher. And when you look at some of the surrounding districts like Pflugerville, you compare us to San Antonio or others, we actually have $1,000 more per student on target revenue. Some of that's eaten up by Social Security, but not all of it. And I think, the question about strategic comps, but I think this idea of getting community advocacy for this issue is important, whether it's a task force or whatever, to support it, because really these kind of elections are typically won by community advocates, not school districts advocates. And there's a lot of things that they can go do to advocate. We can educate, but we can't, as a board member, board using district resources, we can't advocate for elections. We can educate, but we can't advocate, as I understand it. Mr. Raxler, am I saying that correctly? So, yes. Sort of, roughly, right? And so, board members can do a little bit more than staff, but not using district resources. So we have to go do it on our own, and that's a role we're going to have to play.
You have to give up your salary as a board member.
Well, I think at this point, people feel like we're already paid twice what we deserve, which is zero. So the one thing I'll last say is, and I'm a little confused, and this came up last time we did this, was the midpoint raise versus the overall raise, where we say we're going out and we're giving let's pick 3%, and then some employees got less than 3 and some got more than 3. That was actually very confusing to not only some of the people in the public, but some of the employees that were out thinking they were getting a 3% raise, but in fact they didn't. And I don't know if all the numbers are calculated on a midpoint, and that means that some of our people will get less than 3, or if one of these numbers, but I'd be interested to see the number of what it would be if everybody got a 3% raise, not just midpoint.
I can answer relatively quickly, I think, Mr. Williams. It would be the same pot of money. It would be 3% new money. It's the distribution across the salary schedule. So the value of 3% for financial purposes is the very same amount of money.
Okay.
It's how it's spread across an increase. We have used the midpoint here again because if you don't use the midpoint, the lower people get less and the higher paid people get more of the 3%. It's a philosophical choice. In years, there's been a year here where we've given the pure 3%. Most of the time we've done the midpoint, and the midpoint is the balancing factor so that that piece of your lower group that is making less money at least get a higher increase to try to move toward the midpoint, and you try to keep some competitiveness between top and bottom salaries.
I think we just got to be able to explain that
Yes, sir.
better
I
than
can-
my
I-
experience was. I think fairly people were frustrated by the perception that they were getting a certain pay increase, and then they actually didn't get that. Some may have got more, they were probably okay with it, but those that might have been above the midpoint got less, and that felt inequitable to them who thought they were getting a 3% raise.
Yes,
So
sir.
I think we're going to have to make sure we at least understand what that looks like.
That is a choice that we could make as an administration with the board as well. So you could do either option. The midpoint is designed to keep the ranges from spreading so far apart from one another.
And the last thing, which really goes back to ranges, you didn't present it tonight, but when I think about the charts you presented over time, particularly the steps and ladders, where you look at year 1 to year 30, we actually have sort of an inverted curve where we're at our first year, we're sort of at, I mean, this is sort of overall in the average salary, I think. But we have some years where we're actually less than our markets, and then some years we're higher. And whether we need to think about any adjustments where, as part of this raise, we actually need to change our steps and ladders. So it's not the 300, 300, 300, 600, 600, 600, that we actually do something strategic. And maybe this isn't the year for that. But I think we need to think about that, making sure that we're compensating people in the right way so that we're not losing. And you know a better sense of who's leaving and who's not leaving and why they're leaving. Is it salary? But I just know that in the past, we can sort of say where we are versus other districts, but that's not, that is not indicative of where we are at every year of level of experience. Some years we're better, some years we're worse, whether we ought to think about changing it. Because obviously other districts do it differently than we do.
Yes, sir. We do our analysis at every 5 steps against other school districts. So when you see us do a ranking, it's looking at the entire schedule of other school districts, but at every 5th step, something to consider. 2 school districts, Aldine and Plano, have recently eliminated their step and salary, their steps and lanes. And what they've done is they've set the individuals onto a schedule at the onset of employment, and then they give a percentage increase on that particular person's setup. That is something we could be working toward. I think the benefit from that I've looked at recently, I kind of like that idea, is because you eliminate this concept that this is the salary schedule and this is what you're locked into. It kind of addresses the issue that you've just mentioned, because actually the salary schedule goes away. You have a beginning salary, that's what you set people on, and you begin to move away from it then after the initial setup. It does require some transition with employees who are currently in place. You just simply start there and move forward. But the idea is very simple. You really do not have a salary schedule per se that has steps and lanes any longer. You just simply have a beginning wage, and each person then moves forward. It would be conducive to giving a pure 3% raise for everyone if you did that, because at the top and the bottom would become insignificant. It's no longer a published item.
At least for me, I personally be intrigued in exploring that. It may not be that we have the time to do, this may be more our reactive step, because we're so far behind already. But I think strategically, as human capital is a long-term play. I mean, this is going to happen forever. We may have to look at something different to be able to deal with particularly some of these issues of our price, tax rate wars. We're not going to have enough money. We probably have to use the money we have smarter and wiser in the future, and that may be one way to do it.
We are definitely playing a game of catch-up right now, so we can't be very creative.
Okay, other comments or questions on this issue? So I think what you heard tonight actually was pretty strong support for moving forward, but I do think, someone could read it in the paper and says, oh my gosh, the board's, we think we've got to get a really good FAQ out quickly about why this makes sense if we decide to move forward, so we don't get behind the PR curve quickly. And then we need to, if we're thinking this is where the administration wants to go, we got to figure out how much for what, and then start trying to get some allies to help us and the public to support this kind of thing. Okay, I know there's a couple of things on the agenda that you asked for, and I want to make sure I get feedback. At least one was coming out of financial exigency. Didn't really ask explicitly, but I know that question had gotten raised before. I'm going to just jump. Is there anybody that thinks we shouldn't come out of financial exigency? I think the administration is proposing that we do.
Yes, we are planning that we do.
So is there anybody that thinks we should not? Okay, I think we can plan on moving forward on that. And there was there one other thing, Nicole, that you were asking for? Is that, have we addressed the tax rate, possible scenarios? financial exigency, compensation, tax, okay, and I guess you'll come back to us with the preliminary budget, but also deals with, you said same services, but we also, I think, need to be smart about what the investments are going to need to be to meet the needs of the priorities that we've established. Dr. Starfman.
And Mr. President, trustee of the board, the calendar committee is meeting on January 19th, and so, 18th, or is it 19th? Oh, gosh, anyway, well, soon enough, and Wednesday, the 18th. And they've already been discussing the timeline and the scheduling of coming out of financial exigency as well, so we have
Okay.
all that on our calendar committee.
Very good. Ms. Conley Abram.
I'm sorry, I was going to prepare possible action for the January regular meeting to withdraw out of the financial exigency.
I think I got.
Amenable to that.
Let's plan on doing that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you all very much. Appreciate all the work. Thank you to all of our staff for being here. Happy New Year. Welcome back. Thanks for all your continued efforts. We will look forward to see. We are not, just for public, we are not meeting next Monday, MLK Day, and we will be meeting again on the 23rd. Okay, thank you very much.
Happy New Year.
Happy, bye-bye.